Thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Paulo and Anna, for hosting. It's a beautiful place you've got here. It's been a wonderful couple of days I've already spent. Looking forward to the morning with some of you, and then the rest of the day and tomorrow with the rest of you. I think I'm going to start with a quick background about myself, and then I always like to start my presentations with questions. So, what is it that you are curious about? If you know enough to know about what I have to talk about, that you have some questions. The more I can speak to you and what you're curious about, the more I can provide value, as opposed to just saying what I think is important. So I'll do that. We'll do a first hour and a half or so with whiteboard, which I'm very comfortable with, and then I think a quick break, and then I'll do some slides sharing our research and our technology we've been developing. But to start with, sort of the background principles that I've understood and where I come from, I think is valuable context. So, yeah, my name is Dan Kittredge. That's pretty evident now from this name tag situation here. I'm from the States. I grew up on a small organic farm in Massachusetts, which is in the northeast corner of the U.S. So yeah, my parents had been community organizers in the inner city Boston when they met, and decided that they did not want to raise the kids in the street, and so bought a piece of land on a dirt road and built a pretty rustic passive solar house with a wood stove and a root cellar with a milk cow. It was a fairly subsistence style of livelihood that I was raised with, which I think was quite a blessing, actually, in today's day and age, to have those practical, real-world skills of growing food and chopping wood and keeping the house warm with a fire and putting your food aside for the winter. I think it was a really wonderful foundational life experience. My parents, as a profession, ran an organic farming organization. They helped actually found an organic farming organization in the early 1980s called NOFA, Northeast Organic Farming Association. They helped write some of the first organic standards in the U.S. Again in the 1980s, and ran that organization for 30 plus years. So I come from a background, as a sort of subsistence farmer, homesteader, organic farmer, but also actively involved in the organic movement, and with context on sustainable and permaculture and agroecology and biodynamics and local and regenerative. I think these are all sort of words that have ebbed and flowed and come and gone over the last number of decades of my life, that are all really sort of speaking about one sort of general thing. And it seems to me that the names come and go, but there's a deeper impulse there that is what I have been focusing my life on now for 20 years professionally. So as part of my background, I managed my parents' farm through my college years and into my 20s. I would work on the farm in the summertime and then travel the world, be a bit of an activist in the winter, until I met my wife and decided to settle down and raise a family. At which point I had now found no other way of making a living besides farming. I hadn't really developed any other professional skills. And I had not really found a better way, I thought, to raise children than on the land, in close contact with nature, with both parents at home and community around. So I set about trying to be a farmer myself professionally, and it was at that point that I realized that I, like a lot of other farmers, couldn't make a living. Has anybody ever heard of this concept about it being difficult to make a living farming? I was brought up with this idea that organic was better, that we were better people because we were organic. And people that were not organic were below us. Our noses were properly raised at the farmer's market every Saturday morning because we were better people. And it was really when I came to terms with the fact that being eaten alive by a flesh-eating fungus is not a sign of health that I began to question what it was that I'd been taught.
What's a better spot?
A better spot. Am I not speaking loud enough? No. Yeah. So as I was saying, it was when I realized that, when my plants were being eaten alive by insects and disease, and that was not a sign of health, that I began to question what it was that I had been taught. I use the example of flesh-eating fungus. You have MRSA and VRSA here, multiple staph resistance. There's like a flesh-eating fungus, a staph infection that you get in the hospital sometimes, and it's a big issue, and the antibiotics don't work. Being eaten alive by a flesh-eating fungus, right? That's a sign of something being wrong with, you would argue, but most people would agree something's wrong with your body if you have a flesh-eating fungus. I didn't realize that mildew and blight are flesh-eating funguses eating my plants. You would argue that if you had a cow that had, flies had laid eggs on its hind end, and those eggs had hatched, and there were larvae eating that cow alive, you'd say something's wrong with that cow. Probably in good conscience, you would not slaughter that cow and feed it to your children or to your customers. But every year, year in, year out, there were larvae eating my plants alive. My potato plants are being eaten alive by larvae, my tomato plants, my corn plants, etc. And it was when I realized that being eaten alive by flesh-eating funguses and larvae is a sign of poor health, that I realized that maybe organic was not all there was to it. Maybe there was more to it. Because if I looked out into nature and all the plants around me, the trees, the grasses, all the things that we weren't bothering with, they seemed to do just fine. In the middle of a drought, they were still green. When there was too much rain, they had no problems. There was more to it than just not using chemicals. And from a foundational standpoint, the logistics of making a living as a farmer required that my plants produce crops. And if they're sick and dying, then it's very difficult to make a living. So that focused my mind. And I started to read books and go to conferences, attend seminars, and sort of broaden my perspective beyond the organic orthodoxy that I was raised in. And it was through that broader integration of insights from the permaculture community, from the biodynamic community, from the agroecological community, from the conventional agricultural science community, biochemistry and microbiology and physics and agronomy, the quantum perspective, from indigenous perspectives, from broadening my understandings to look at what actually, I like to say, is how did nature evolve things to work? The more I understood how plants had been growing for 400 plus million years with no fertilizer, the more I was able to mimic those strategies on my farm. And it really didn't take much time at all, less than 2 years of studying in the winter and practicing in the summer to get to the point where I could literally make my living farming working 20 hours a week, which gave me time to play with my kids, help with the homeschooling, take naps, etc. So I got to thinking that if I had grown up on an organic farm and my parents ran an organic farming organization, and a lot of these insights I had not been exposed to or aware of, probably there were others as well who were not aware of them. And so I established, well, first I started teaching workshops at the local conference. My parents ran the organization, so they ran the conference. I could get a speaking gig at the conference. That turned into courses, which turned into an NGO founded in 2010 called the Bionutrient Food Association. And my particular focus was on this question of the inherent quality of the food, because one of the things that I'd learned when I went to these conferences and was reading these books was that there's actually a variation in nutrient levels in food. That I thought previously that organic was better. We were better people, our plants were healthier, we had a better impact on the environment, and our crops were more nutritious. Lo and behold, there's a spectrum of variation in nutrient levels in organic crops, and some of them are good, but a lot of them actually aren't that good. There's a spectrum of variation in conventional crops. Some of them are bad, but some of them are actually quite good. Permaculture, biodynamics, etc. Agroecology, regenerative, whatever the term of art is, There's actually a spectrum of variation in the nutritional levels in the food produced by people who identify as that thing. I'm a Methodist, I'm a Presbyterian, I'm a evangelical, I'm a Catholic, right? There's all kinds of Christians out there. Some Catholics actually do have a meaningful relationship with Jesus, some don't. Some Presbyterians have a really deep spiritual path, others don't, right? Just because you go to this church or that church does not actually correlate to the effect of your actions. It's more of a facade or a surface definition. So what I had seen was that there was no organization, there was no network, there was no conversation occurring focusing on the nutritional value of the food. It seemed to me that was actually the point. The point is to produce food that's nutritious. And if there is a spectrum of variation, then we should be focusing on the result, which is the quality of the food, not the identity, which is I'm regenerative, I'm organic, I'm permaculture, etc. So yeah, we started the organization in 2010 with a mission to increase quality in the food supply. By quality, we're talking about flavor, aroma, nutritive value, health-giving attribute, which sure seems to correlate with pest and disease resistance, soil health, ecosystem function, farm viability. One could argue human health, the capacity to reverse chronic disease. And so, yeah, so we started giving these courses, and they spread from word of mouth, from where I live in the northeast part of the US. We'd teach a course in New York, someone from Ohio would come, they would go home, they would try these things out we're talking about, they'd get results, and they'd say, hey, why don't you come and talk to some of my friends here in Ohio? And those people in Ohio would try it out, and somebody from Colorado would have come to the course, and they would say, well, I'm getting, my pests are gone, this is really quite exciting. Why don't you come talk to some of my friends in Colorado? And so it spread through word of mouth, across the US and then into other countries. Didn't matter the soil type, the climate zone, the crop type, the scale. It was applicable across the board. These, what I call principles of biological systems, apply. And so that's what this 2-day course is, which some of you are here not going to experience for the 2 days. But that's what this is what I'm beginning here in this process. And so I'm gonna try to weave together a couple of the concepts that are applicable for the audience just this morning, but also, keep it on track for the people who are here for 2 days. Subsequent to that all, beginning to spread broadly further and further afield, we began to have this conversation. Look, if we can improve farm viability, if we can, increase soil health, if we can improve economic, ecological system function, if we could conceivably have very positive impacts on human health, wouldn't this be something that would be good to try to bring to scale? And the question then became, how would one do that? How would you bring to scale these and implementation of these principles? And the thought was that you would use an economic incentive. That effectively, money is a very powerful force in today's day and age, and if we can help people make more money doing the right thing, they'll likely do it. If it's the right thing for the environment, that's all well and good, but if actually you make more money doing something different than what's good for the environment, you're likely to focus on what you do to pay the bills rather than what's good for the environment. And so the question then became, how would one organize an economic lever to incentivize these principles and practices being applied? And the thought was, if we could give people who buy food the ability to discern between the relative nature of the food on the shelf, as in you've got 3 bags of carrots to choose from at your point of purchase, and one's 20 out of 100, and one's 40 out of 100, and one's 80 out of 100, we thought people would likely choose the 80s if they could, and leave the 40s and 20s. And if all the 80s left the shelf, then the buyers might go back to the farmers and say, hey, we want more of these and we don't want any of those. So through simple, supply chain, drivers, through economic incentive, we could shift the priorities for the farmers about how they produced food. And we set about that project in 2010, 2017. We really sort of devised the strategy in 2016 about how to accomplish it. We had 3 basic questions. One was, how dramatic is the scale of nutrient variation in food? The second question was, if there is a dramatic variation, what causes it? Is it the soil type or the variety or individual practices or labels? Or is it perhaps soil health, something more systemic? And the third question was it possible to build basically a handheld ray gun that would be the way you would test as you would flash a light at the crop with a science called spectroscopy, which is how we know what stars are made up of many, many light years away. If we can take a picture of the light coming from a star 10,000 light years away, which is a very long distance, and see what it's made up of, which we can, why can't we flash a light at a carrot in front of us, take a picture of that light that bounces back, and see what that carrot is made up of? Our thesis was it's possible to build handheld, consumer-priced spectrometers that could be calibrated to that nutrient variation. And so the strategy would be to move beyond certifications, labels, and claims to give people basically handheld scientific instruments with which they could discern the nature of their supply chain. So that's what I've been working on for the past number of years as a primary effort, and which we'll talk about after we have our break. What I want to talk about for the first hour here is really these basic principles of biological systems. How did nature evolve things to function? How have plants been growing for the last 420 million years? Because I think when you understand that, when you understand how simple and elegant it is, perhaps you'll be left with a sense of empowerment about how readily we can reverse the climatic and environmental destruction that has been caused through the practice of agriculture over the past 10,000 years. So I'm going to focus primarily on that for the time being, and then we'll talk about the meter and the nutrition after the break. But before I get into that, what questions do people have that you'd love me to discuss? While we're letting people in, does anybody have questions or things you'd like me to focus on?
What we want to focus on?
Yes. I'll take notes here on the board. Yeah.
About like how different practices affect soil health and nutrient density.
Okay.
So, how are you expecting to communicate with people so that the choice between the 3
Yes.
will be correct?
Yes.
So communication.
Okay.
Hey, I would just, I think, add to this, like, what's the communication strategy with the clients, like with the consumers, with the people going to the stores and buying?
I think that'll fit in there. Yeah.
My bad.
No, it's all good. Yeah. I'm thinking people are here to learn about how to grow food too. Yes.
Maybe market opportunities for nutrient dense foods, like how do you market that, how do you explain that without a label, because you were talking about labels, differentiations in labels. Right now we focus on that as a consumer to buy responsible, but how do you
I think it's the same question these two asked.
Sorry, because I cannot really hear well because of that.
Okay. Yeah, how do we communicate this concept to people? What everyone's been asking so
Not
far.
to people, but also to other players in the supply chain. Also, like, who is interested in the supply chain to actually have increased nutrient density, and how can we leverage that information?
If everyone wants to talk about nutrient density, I can talk about that first. I thought I would talk about agronomy first, but I can go either way. Yeah? No one cares?
No,
I would like to know what is the role of the authorities in all of these systems.
Okay. We're going to do the slideshow first. When I was going to these conferences, we're back in 2006, 2007, 2008, and I was asking all the elders at these conferences, what's this word for this variation in nutrient levels in food, they said, we don't have one. I said, but this is a really important topic. How do you discuss this concept that some stuff is more nutritious and some stuff is less? They're like, we call it bricks. Bricks is the thing we use to test, which is, you know, the meter that the farmers use to see the relative level of plant health, which is a 180-year-old technology, which is extraordinarily, it's not sugar.
Yeah.
Bricks
Yeah,
is
no,
not
it's-
sugar.
Yeah, soluble,
Total dissolved solids,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Yes, exactly. Calibrated to percent sucrose.
yeah.
Yeah. So the bricks refractometer was the thing that the farmers were using on the ground all over the world to see how healthy your plants were. And if you got a bricks reading of 12, in the leaf of the plant while it's growing, you had pest and disease resistance. Insects and disease physiologically could not digest your plant. Yields were high, economic viability was good, and so all the people who were deep down the rabbit hole in this world were helping the farmers support the biological system sufficient to get high bricks readings, because when the bricks readings were high, economic viability was high, shelf life was high, flavor was high, et cetera, et cetera. And so bricks was the tool that was used. But I said, you know, bricks is a nice thing. It's a scientific scale. It's like the Fahrenheit scale or the Richter scale. But what is the word for this concept for this? There is a spectrum of variation in food quality, and there was not one. So effectively, that's what myself and a couple other people helped to create, was this term nutrient density, which previously meant something in food science. Prior to that point in time, nutrient density in food science meant the average nutrients per unit calorie. So in conventional food science, all rice is considered to be uniform, all kale is considered to be uniform, all Coca-Cola is considered to be uniform. If you get a bag of carrots, it'll say it has this much vitamin D and this much iron, et cetera, et cetera.
Sorry, can you repeat the definition for density?
Traditionally, in food science, it was the average nutrients
Yeah.
per calorie.
Yeah.
So kale was considered to be more nutrient dense than rice. Rice is considered to be more nutrient dense than Coca-Cola. There's not a lot of calories in kale. There are a lot of nutrients. There is a lot of calories in rice, but there's a lot of nutrients. There's a lot of calories in Coca-Cola, but no nutrients. And so there's a scale, and kale was high and Coca-Cola was low. So traditionally in food science, like in chemistry, organic used to mean contains carbon. And then a social movement rose up and said, organic means no synthetic materials applied. And so now when people talk about organic, most of them don't think about what it used to mean 50 years ago. Organic used to mean contains carbon. Now people think about organic, you guys say biologique here,
Yeah.
but you probably have heard the word organic referred to, and you maybe understand it as synonymous with biologique, but in the US, certainly organic means no chemicals. So in a similar way, we chose to use the word nutrient density to refer to the variation in nutrient levels between this kale and that kale, or this rice and that rice. So that was the word we chose to use, and now is, I think, beginning to build some momentum, at least in my experience where I travel. I mean, people obviously invite me to come talk about it, but the word I'm getting is people are beginning to have this conversation about not all kale is uniform, not all carrots are uniform. And back 15 years ago, that was not a conversation that I was exposed to anywhere in the food movement. So anyway, this is a picture of the farm I grew up on. It also happens to be the front page of the website of the organization that I'm the founder of, called the Bionutrient Food Association. So for what it's worth, nutrient density is a word that we've been using to stimulate this conversation and try to focus the movement more on the results than the processes and certifications. As I said, we were founded 14 years ago in 2010. Our mission is to increase quality of the food supply. By quality, we're talking about flavor, aroma, nutritive value, not aesthetic and volume, right? Currently, farmers are paid based on aesthetic and volume. You get paid number of kilograms, number of tons, number of bushels, number of pounds. You don't get paid on flavor. You don't get paid on nutritive level. So our focus is on the nutritive value of the food. And our hope is, our intention is, for the ambient level of nutrition in food next year to be higher than it is this year for all people on the planet. And in 2 years, we want it to be higher than it is next year. So increasing quality in the food supply so that the ambient level of nutrition in food is higher going forward for humanity. That's our vision, or our mission, our intention. As I said, our first number of years were spent doing educational work, leading courses, giving workshops. We established a conference to bring together sort of thought leaders in the field to begin to coalesce these ideas, and really it was about supporting the growers and doing a better job for the first number of years. But as we began to see that these principles were applying across the board, we started to look at this larger question of how to bring it to scale. As I said, we had 3 questions that we identified that all needed to be answered in the affirmative. Should this be a viable strategy with which to disrupt agriculture? The concept is we could disrupt the way agriculture is done if people could test nutrients in food with a flash of light at point of purchase, not just a consumer, but anybody in the supply chain. If a consumer can do it, a retailer can do it, a wholesaler can do it, a packager can do it, a processor can do it, a buyer can do it, right? If it's possible for a consumer, then everybody else in the supply chain will have that skill, that capacity. So our basic strategy was, the basic questions again were, to what degree is the scale of variation of nutrient levels in crops? With all the specialists and professors and things that we talked to, their presumption was that the scale of nutrient variation was perhaps 2%, 5%, maybe 10%, but certainly nothing more than that. The second question was, if there was dramatic nutrient variation, what was causal? Again, talking to the credentialed specialists in the agronomic field, the presumption was it was genetics. If anything, genetics was a major piece. And if it wasn't genetics, it was soil type. But those would be the dominant factors which would be driving nutrient variation in food. But actually, it's probably quite minimal, so it's not even a conversation worth having. Our thought was that as farmers, what we were seeing was when we engaged the dynamics sufficient to cause the overall health of the soil to be more functional, that the plants were healthier, the flavor was better. We were seeing dramatic things happening differently when we improved soil health. And so we thought maybe it was something like soil health and not soil type or variety. The third question again was, is it possible to build a handheld, consumer-priced, non-invasive nutrient meter? Effectively a ray gun, right? Star Trek. Is it possible for the average person to afford something that they could hold in their hand and flash a light at food and get real-time readings that were empirically viable, like statistically significant? A scientific instrument in your hand to test nutrients. We thought if the answer to all 3 questions was yes, then we had a viable strategy going forward to achieve some significant effect. So that was 2016 when we developed this sort of vision and strategy. In 2017, I'll just say one more thing, that all of the work we've done, everything I'm about to share with you that we've done as a charitable nonprofit, we call it nonprofit, you guys call them NGOs, as an educational nonprofit, everything we've done is with donations. We are committed to all of the data we collect, all of the engineering, the apps, the software, everything being open source and in the commons. Our thought is if we are endeavoring to develop a definition of good and bad, 1 to 100, if it's black boxed, if it's proprietary, if it's locked up, like the Google algorithm or the Facebook algorithm, then no one should trust it. So if we're attempting to develop a definition of quality that can shift things, it must be open and in the commons, and then therefore no investment is possible. Anybody who wants to invest is going to want intellectual property rights, they're going to want proprietary control of some fashion, they're going to want to lock it up. And so strategically that's a non-starter. So everything I'm about to discuss with you, we've done through charitable donations. 2017 was our first year initiating this work, and that year we were able to raise enough money to build a first prototype handheld sensor. 2018, we built our first lab, and we tested our first 2 crops. carrots and spinach. It was just that year, carrots and spinach. We had people send in samples of carrot and spinach from grocery stores, from farmers markets, from farm stands, from their gardens, from their farms, from Michigan and Montana and Massachusetts and Minnesota, across the US, just the US initially, organic, not organic. Our objective was to survey the supply chain. We're not doing replicated randomized trials. We're assessing the nature of the scale of variation of nutrient levels in the supply chain at point of purchase. What's relevant to us is what's available to people when they go to get food for their families. We don't care necessarily about what the causal dynamics are. That's a big, complicated question. The first question is, how dramatic is the scale of variation? And with every carrot or spinach that we got into the lab, we flashed a light at it first with our meter before running it through the lab to assess the nutrients. So we could build a spectral signature that could overlay against the actual numbers. Our second year, 2019 of lab work, we set up our second lab at Chico State University in California, and we were able to increase the number of crops to 6 that year. And we as well had farmers send in the soil in triplicate. So if we're getting the carrot samples, we want to, 3 samples of carrot from across the bed. We also took the soil from the top 10 centimeters and the next 10 centimeters from underneath each carrot sample to assess, because we want to see what the dynamics are in the soil that are related to the nutrient levels in the carrot. As well, we asked the farmers a series of environmental conditions and management questions. What was the variety you planted? When did you plant it? Where did you source the seed? How did you prepare the soil? With what? How deeply? How many times did you pass? Did you use cover crops? What was the mix? When did you plant them? How did you terminate them? What was your fertility program? Did you irrigate? With what? How often? We wanted to ask as many environmental conditions and management data questions as possible to overlay against the soil metrics, to overlay against the nutrient dynamics, right? Because we're asking this question, if there's nutrient variation that's significant, what causes it? This slide here shows the data collected in 2020, one of our years. In 2020, we were able to set up our third lab here in Europe, in France. You can see we went far beyond 6 crops that year. This is the total number of samples of crop that year. In the entirety, we've got almost 10,000 samples of crop and about 8,000 soil samples. Every green dot you see is a farm. So those are the farms that are taking the soils, the crops in triplicate, soils in multiple triplicate, and answering the management questions. These are the metrics we're assessing in the soil, and those are the metrics we're assessing in the food. So far from a comprehensive nutritional assessment, but at least something. Yeah.
Are you still working with these labs in France?
No. No, this was our preliminary work.
Why France?
Because we had a relationship with a group there that wanted to work with us.
Okay.
We're just a grassroots podunk organization. Yeah, this is our preliminary work. This is 2020. Right now it's 2024, so I'll walk you through where we're at now. Yes?
Why are the samples of crops so different? Was it important or relevant to, it was just because people...
Who wants to send in what from where?
Okay.
We are a grassroots, bottom up, got the word out to whatever degree we could, raised whatever money we could. We're engaging people to send in samples. Who wants to be a citizen scientist? Send stuff in. Who wants to be a farmer? Send stuff in. There was no control over anything.
Okay.
We're simply trying to survey the supply chain to the best of a degree possible. We're not controlling anything, except we want the crops at the point of purchase. We want to sample the food from the moment or the point when the consumer would be able to access it.
Was it also a matter of resources, how many different types of crops you could analyze, or what enabled you to increase the number of crops?
We had to develop protocols in the lab to assess, how do you ensure statistical significance, and what's the extraction process for leafy greens versus roots versus fruits versus grains. So a series of logistics. If anybody who's run labs before, until you've established a protocol for doing the sampling, you can't do that. So everything was basically we got to raise the money, we identify the priorities, we got this much money, we can do these two things, we can't do that thing. So, yeah.
Among the variables that you were asking for, which
Record.
were you including weather, climatic?
Weather?
stresses?
Yeah, so we actually were able to connect to the, I'm not sure what the service is, it's like NASA. So we geolocated the soil, so we knew what the soil type was, we could overlay that on soil maps, and with the geolocation from the soil, we knew what the weather patterns were as well. Yeah.
Sorry, and what are the methods used to determine these nutrients?
FRAP, it'll be on these things. XRF was what we used for the minerals, X-ray fluorescence. There's FRAP and ORAC for antioxidants and polyphenols. And then, no, it's all good. I can't remember what the name for the protein. Lowry maybe for protein? For those who know, Lowry. Lowry for protein, ORAC and FRAP for antioxidants and polyphenols, and XRF for the minerals. Okay, so these next few slides here I'm going to show you are the results we found for carrots, just some of the data. Understand that we have graphs like this for 20 other crops. So for wheat and oats, for potatoes and beets, for blueberries and apples and squash and cucumbers, for mustard greens and leeks, like for 20 other crops, roots, leaves, fruits, and grains, we have graphs that look remarkably similar to this. And as I said, everything we've collected is open source. It's in the commons. We've got our bionutrientinstitute.org website where all the reports are, and you can actually interrogate the data with what's called a data explorer. So we've got a lot of stuff there for people who are curious and looking in more detail. But let me just explain this for those who are not scientists, what these graphs are telling us. So the nutrients we're looking at here are all nutrients that are understood to be deficient in those who consume a Western diet. In general, it's understood our bodies have not enough of these things. So, all right, so sulfur. Okay, so we've got 0, 20, 40, 60. This is measured in milligrams per 100 grams. The carrot with the lowest level of sulfur we found was 8.41 milligrams per 100 grams. The carrot with the highest level was 33.19. So if you divide 33.19 by 8.41, you get about 4x. That's not 4%, that's not 40%, that's 400%. If you call this 8.410 and you call this 33.19 100, then the red zone is 0 to 20 out of 100. The orange is 20 to 40. The yellow is 40 to 60. The green is 60 to 80, and the dark green is 80 to 100. So we can see the peak of the curve is in the 23rd percentile. So we can see the vast majority of the samples we collected were below the 50th percentile. The range of variation is 4x, and the peak of the curve is in the 25th percentile. The vast majority of what's available is relatively quite low in relation to what's possible. Phosphorus, 11.7 to 93.69. That's a more than 8x variation. So you'd have to eat 8 of these carrots to get as much phosphorus as if you ate 1 of these carrots. I like to talk about when I went to college, there was a grading regimen which was, from a 90 to 100 was an A. There was A minus, an A, and A plus. From 80 to 89 was a B. From 70 to 79 was a C. From 60 to 69 was a D. And everything below 60 was an F. I hear that these days, for kids that go to college, that's not quite how it works, but that's how I grew up, and I'm just going to use that as a concept. So here's your A's and B's, here's your C's and D's, and everything else is your F's. This is the nature of the supply chain. This is an 8x variation. It's not 8%, It's not 80%, it's 800%. Here we have antioxidants. People have heard about antioxidants. They're generally considered to be beneficial. Blueberries are high in antioxidants. Pomegranates are high in antioxidants. 4.92, 195.
That's the result from America or in
Nope,
France?
this is all of Europe. It wasn't just France. It was 6 countries in Europe over 5 years. That's a 40x variation. Not 4% or 40% or 400%, 4,000% variation. We have graphs like this for cucumbers and for blueberries and for apples and potatoes and wheat and oats. This is not like an outlier for carrots. This is just one of the 20 plus crops we've collected significant data for. These are bell curves. These are looking relatively a lot like bell curves here. For anybody who's a scientist, we're not seeing like total outliers. We're just seeing.
But did you see the difference between America and France, the result from France? No?
It wasn't France. It was Europe. It was 6 countries in Europe. I'm sorry. There's a lot of uncomfortable things. I haven't gotten to the really uncomfortable stuff yet. We're about to get to some really uncomfortable stuff for anybody who thinks they're part of the movement. There's a lot of really uncomfortable information here. 40x is the variation. Here's polyphenols. Polyphenols are understood to be flavor compounds. They're the things that we as animals have evolved a very sophisticated capacity to assess. It's called flavor and aroma. Flavor and aroma correlates with nutrition. And as animals, 30% of our DNA is associated with the function of our noses and tongues, because you are what you eat, and the health of your babies has a lot to do with what you build your body out of. Polyphenols, anti-cancer, anti-diabetes, all these chronic diseases that are managed, the diseases of modern society, quote unquote. 2.34, 49.75, that's a 20x variation. Peak of the curve in, we'll call it generously the 10th percentile. How many samples are above the 30th percentile? The relative level of these very categorically health beneficial compounds in our supply chain is remarkably low. Certainly you can produce volume with chemistry. The question is, are you producing nutrition? When you go to the university and you get a soil test, how many elements do they recommend you apply in your soil test? How many elements do you need for one strand of human DNA to replicate? You know what this thing called DNA? Everybody heard about DNA, right? All right, let's say you're a car. Let's say your car's brake pads wear out. You're designed to have your brake pads taken out and new brake pads put in, right? That's a mechanical system if you're a car. You're a mechanical system. We're not designed to have our knees taken out and replaced. We're not designed to have our livers taken out and replaced. What happens every day, whether you know it or not, is that 4 billion of your oldest, junkiest cells get disassembled and new ones put back in. Your eyeballs, your liver, your flesh, your bones, your blood. Every single day, your body is constantly taking the oldest, most worn out pieces, disassembling them, and building new ones in their place. There's this thing called a nucleus inside of a cell. People have heard about the nucleus. Inside the nucleus is this thing called DNA. 4 billion times a day, that DNA must be replicated in that cell as part of the basic biological maintenance system. It's your basic operating system. You don't give permission. You can't turn it on. You can't turn it off. It's part of being alive. At the core of the compounds necessary to replicate that DNA, there's these compounds called enzymes. People have heard about enzymes? Enzymes are used to put things together and take things apart. They're biochemical sockets and wrenches. If you've ever fixed a tractor or fixed a car, you got screwdrivers, you got Allen wrenches, you got square bits, you got star bits, you got 9/16 sockets and a 10 millimeter socket. People know what I'm talking about? Those are mechanical. That's what enzymes are in biological systems. Enzymes have unique sizes and shapes, and they're used to do very specific jobs. And the center of every enzyme is a different element. There's copper-based enzymes and zinc-based enzymes, chromium-based enzymes, vanadium-based enzymes, yttrium-based enzymes. You need 25 different elements at the core of the necessary elements, enzymes, to replicate every strand of human DNA. Every strand of DNA, a big, long, complicated compound, needs a bunch of different enzymes to replicate itself. 25 different elements: copper, zinc, phosphorus, manganese, molybdenum, cobalt, selenium. How many elements can you name? How many elements does your soil test recommend that you ensure are in sufficient levels to produce crops? The model we have for farming right now is focused on volume, not nutrition. Pest pressure is nature's report card saying you have failed to produce animal food. Fungal pressure, like nature speaks to us all day long. The question is whether we're listening. Different organisms have different levels of digestive system function. If someone were to walk a cow in here, right? Let's just say first, there was a couple of bales of hay when you walked in. You might have considered sitting on one of those bales of hay, but you probably would not have considered eating it. Fair statement? If someone walked a cow in, that cow would see that hay as food, but not as a seat. Everyone's going to agree with me on that statement. Why is the hay food for a cow and not food for you? Cow's got 4 stomachs. She's evolved to digest complex cellulose and turn it into food, and we're not. We can't digest hay. Everybody's okay with that statement? You've got a different level of digestive system function than a cow does. Okay? I'm walking you down a path here. Different organisms have different levels of digestive system function. Larvae, the baby forms of insects, do not have livers. They don't have livers. They don't have the enzymes in their gut necessary to digest complete protein. Amino acids, great. Nitrates, ammonia, awesome. They can digest nitrogen in that form all day long. But when your plant is functioning well enough to build complete proteins in its flesh, it becomes indigestible to the larvae. This is how plants in nature don't get eaten alive by larvae, is because they have a well enough functioning gut flora to access all the nutrients they need sufficient to build complex compounds and be indigestible to those pathogens. Fungi, when you get high levels of lipids built in your plants, fats and oils, fungi can't digest your plants. Your blights and your mildews cannot eat your crops if they are able to build high levels of lipids. All these things we call Phytophthora and Rhizoctonia and Pythium and Alternaria, these soil-borne pathogens, they're quite rudimentary in their digestive system function. What nature's doing is she is discerning which organisms are fit for reproduction and which ones are not. And she'll send in the larvae to take out certain plants because they're not fit for reproduction. She'll send in the fungi to take out other crops because they're not fit for reproduction. From a biochemical standpoint, we're taught that those are enemies, we should kill them. We don't understand that nature's trying to protect us from eating things that have insufficient levels of nutrition for us to have healthy babies. Only when you have food that has high levels of these secondary metabolites, these compounds we call flavor and aroma, which are so complex that they're indigestible to the pathogens, are you actually producing food for animals, for vertebrates, right? It's not about a pound and a pound. It's actually about the flavor and aroma. It's about the nutritional level, which correlates with soil health, which correlates with ecosystem function, right? Producing volume is not producing food. That's producing volume. Anyway, I went a little bit of a rant there. So, the nutritional variation in food that we found was quite dramatic. Now the question is, what causes it? Here we have variety. Again, I said a lot of the agronomist specialists told us that it was a variety. If anything caused nutritional variation, it was variety. That was one of the major factors. This is measured in BQI. So BQI is our stand-in for quality. It's not our definition of quality, but it's an average of 6 elements and 2 compound families. So the antioxidants and the polyphenols, plus the calcium and the potassium and the copper and the zinc, et cetera. Napoli, we got some reds, a couple greens. Bolero, some reds, a couple of yellows, almost into the green. Nantes, some reds and some greens. Mokum, a red and some greens. Romance, some red and some greens. I'm not seeing any connection here between variety and nutritional integrity. What I see is you can plant a mokum seed over here and get low levels of nutrients, and a mokum over here and get high levels of nutrients. Soil type and climate zone. This is a USDA climate zones: northeast, east, north central, southeast, central, northwest, west, southwest. Some places are cold and wet. Some places are cold and dry. Some places are warm and wet. Some places are warm and dry. Some places are in the middle. Red, green, red, green, red, green, red, green. It looks to me like you can plant a carrot in any environment and do a good job or do a bad job. I'm not seeing a correlation between soil type or climate zone and nutritional caliber in food. Point of purchase, here's from the farm. Here's the grocery store. Here's the garden. And here's the farmer's market. Just because you live close by, just because you grow your own food, does not mean that nutritional levels in your food is high. Just because somebody lives a long ways away, maybe has a big farm, does not mean that nutritional levels in their food is low. Just because you got a little backyard garden doesn't mean you're doing a good job. Just because your neighbor, who's really polite and sweet and friendly and you like them and they've got nice kids, is growing your food does not mean they're doing a good job. Here's the really uncomfortable part. Here's certified organic. Cover crops. No-till. I'm not sure if anybody knows about the regenerative world here. No-till. Here's tillage. There's no-till, there's till. Here's organic, not certified. Reference in none is grocery store, not organic. You want to look at where it's fattest? These are called violin graphs. Like, this is your local, not certified organic, but friendly person close by probably. It's fatter over here in the orange. Here's your grocery store. It's fatter over in the yellow. It's possible that professional farmers who've been doing it for a long time, that might be doing it on a big scale, are actually good farmers. It's possible that they actually have learned some things and are doing a not horrible job. Here's regenerative. It's fatter in the orange than the grocery store is, right? This is not what you want if you are in the regenerative movement to see, but this is data. This is what science is for, to get rid of the dogmas, to deal with the reality on the ground. Here's biodynamic. Here's local. Greenhouse, light till, heavy till. What's the only thing that we found that correlated with increased nutrient levels in food? Levels of life in the soil. The level of life in the soil, as measured by soil respiration, was the only thing that we found that correlated with nutrient levels. The more the life in the soil, the more nutrients in the food. The less the life in the soil, the less the nutrients in the food. If I'd done my first hour to explain how biological systems work, you guys would all, that would be a more valuable context right now, but y'all wanted to talk about this, so we're doing this first. All right, so yeah, and then stage 3 is we were able to build this handheld meter and replicate it. We made about 300 of them. We took all the flashes of light and the spectral signatures for every sample of crop that we sent in, and we overlaid that against the mineral and the compound levels, and we back calibrated and we looked for patterns. And we were able to release a meter. I've got one over here that's gotten a little bit beat up from the fact that I carry it all around the world with me. It's
What is the spectrum of the light? Is infrared?
It's 380 to 960. It's basically from the ultraviolet to the infrared through visible. There's 10 LEDs in here, LEDs, like LED lights, that just each LED has a unique frequency. So we chose 10 unique frequencies that you know, we studied the literature first, and we said, you know, polyphenols fluoresce at this frequency, and antioxidants fluoresce at this frequency, and so we chose strategically what those 10 frequencies were going to be, and every single.
And you getting amino acids like tryptophan and so on in this spectrum.
We could,
Yeah.
but we didn't have the money to
Yeah, but
be able to
you
test.
have in this spectrum, you have them.
Right, a lot of things fluoresce in this frequency range. Yeah. But again, this is proof of concept, and we're operating on really small amounts of money here. So we were not able to do that level of depth that we would like to do, which we, next slide, we'll talk about. Yeah. So the point is, we released this instrument with calibrations for 10 crops in 2021. We sold a few hundred of them, went all around the world. We did all the work to make sure that each one got the same readings as the other one, and the statistical significance with the R squared, I think, was above 0.8, which above for biological systems is a pretty good calibration. And yeah, so basically by 2021, we were able to answer our 3 questions in the affirmative. Nutrient variation is dramatic. The cause of nutrient variation seems to be soil health and not variety or soil type or individual practice or certification label or point of purchase. And it's possible to build handheld, consumer-priced, non-invasive, real-time nutrient meters that you could use at point of purchase to assess the relative nutrient levels in food. So
How much does it cost to develop the first one, the product?
we sold them for $377. And as I said, everything's open source. So the specs for how to make this are on a website called GitLab. So anybody who wants to build one or build 1,000 should feel free to.
And that collects data or just shows you an information?
It flashes a light, which is Bluetooth to a smartphone,
Yeah.
which goes to the cloud,
Okay.
and then it
So you
reads off the
collect that
database.
information, you can treat that information.
Right. So basically, yeah, it flashes the light as 10 lights
Yeah.
at a frequency, and then it takes a picture of the light that bounces back. It Bluetooths to the phone, which goes to the cloud, which says, based on what I'm seeing here, I'm spitting out a reading on your phone. So the reading, the app, was on the phone.
But you collect all the reading for
Huh?
all the instruments?
We collect the readings.
The reading. If I buy that instrument,
Mm-hmm.
I can use it, but you don't know where I'm using, in which product I'm using. You don't have that information. Just me.
If you choose to share, you can.
Oh, okay.
If you don't choose to share, you don't have to. One of the things that was our foundational agreement with this whole process was, anybody who sends in a sample from your farm, we will never tell anyone who you are. Anybody who wants to collect data, if you don't want to share it, it's your data to share. We're not Apple. We're not Google. We're not Facebook. We're an open source nonprofit who respects people's integrity and says, we're doing this for the collective good, not to data mine and maximize profit. So our philosophy is entirely different than how these big corporates work, which is why it's taken us so long to get not that far. Because we have chosen not to take in the tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to make billions of dollars that have been offered to us. Because from a strategic standpoint, our objectives could not be accomplished by taking that pathway. This is a very rudimentary instrument. Very rudimentary. This is 3D printed. You know, I mean, we just went off sent off the specs to China, and they made the little chip in here. If we can do it, if a little nonprofit educational organization can do this, certainly other people can do it, right? That's the point. If we can do it, and we published a paper in Nature which proves, Nature Science Communications, I can send you this citation for anybody who wants to see the citation, that this works. Like, this is published as a functioning instrument in Nature Science Communications. As well, we snuck in on the back end the data which showed the massive variation in polyphenols and antioxidants. When you publish papers, you're supposed to only do one thing at a time, and we're like, come on, we have to just, because it's such a pain in the butt. But so, yes, the scale of variation and the fact that this works is in the published peer-reviewed literature. Yes.
I was just wondering, because now one of the claims from a big retailer is to have a DNA instrument to sort out what ingredient do you have in your purchase.
Mhm.
So I wonder, this can be a good thing to differentiate a retailer, to have it for the use of the consumer.
Yeah, that's the whole point.
Yeah, because I was thinking DNA for what?
So what we did, so we talked to the Whole Foods. You guys, have you heard of Whole Foods? Have you heard of Whole Foods? It's a big American retail chain that's sort of associated with organic and high end. Amazon bought them a few years ago. But in 2012, I was in contact with the regional buyer for North Atlantic region of everything from Washington D.C. north for all fresh fruits and vegetables at Whole Foods. And I was explaining to him this concept, and I said, if you guys know that your stuff is better, then why wouldn't you want to work with us to help create this? And he said, we know our stuff is not better, and so we're not going to work with you. And what if you wouldn't mind, when you're 2 years out from having this, please come tell us, and then we'll tell our growers they have 2 years to meet standard. They actually were using bricks. Like when the apples and the oranges were coming from California on the truck, they would get a reading which said, you're going to get this one batch of apples has high bricks. And what they would do is they would make a space in the front of the store. They'd put that big box of apples right there when you walked in. They'd put them on sale. The highest bricks apples. You know why? Because they'd done the research. When people had the experience, and the animal instinct of people had the experience of eating a tasty apple, they go back next time for it. And getting them to come back into the store is all it's about.
Yeah.
So they had done the human, subconscious patterning research, and they knew that getting people to taste the thing that actually has flavor is a great way to get them to come back into your store. But they knew that the vast majority of what they had did not have flavor. So the last thing they wanted to do was to support us in this process. So while it's a nice idea that retailers would hold these meters in their stores, what we can tell you is that the vast majority of the supply chain is quite poor, right? The vast majority of what's out there is relatively quite poor. That's just the nature of what's going on. All right, so next steps. We identified that there are three questions were able to be answered in the affirmative, and so now we said we can begin our project. Now, what is quality? Right? You can't build a meter to test quality until you've defined it. So the work we did was we started with beef. Beef is the foodstuff with the largest ecological footprint on the planet. There's more hectares of land used in the production of beef than anything else. If we're thinking about the climate, if we're thinking about the environment, and we're going to focus on shifting the management practices of one crop, let's focus on beef instead of cucumbers. Cucumbers would have been easier to research, but the amount of acres on the planet used in production of cucumbers is quite small. So we had a hypothesis. Our hypothesis was that cows that eat what cows have been eating for millions of years produce beef that's better than cows that eat what industry's been feeding them for 100 years. That's not too revolutionary, perhaps, of a thesis. The process was, again, we're doing triplicate samples. Each farm that's part of the process, we got samples from 4 continents. Each farm sends in 3 steaks, one from each of 3 animals. We started out looking at 800 different compounds in each steak, and we finally got it down to about 100 different compounds in the final runs that seemed to be most applicable. But we're looking at elements, we're looking at enzymes, we're looking at vitamins, we're looking at fatty acids, we're looking at polyphenols, terpenoids, polyphenols, alkaloids, so many different families of compounds. With the manure, we're looking at 200 different species of microbes. We're looking at a very sophisticated microbiome assessment. We're looking at multiple kingdoms, archaea and bacteria. We're looking not just at the presence of the microbes, but also the concentration. So we want to see how much of each one of these is present. When we looked at the food, we would assess the sample of what the animals were eating. We look at for a diversity of species of plants. We look at also for the nutrients in that food. We looked at the soil that the food was grown in. We asked management questions data about how the animals were raised, what their gender was, what their age, what their genetics were, how they were managed, and we did human health trials. So we fed humans this beef and watch what happened to their blood and their urine with inflammation markers. And then we fed them that beef and watched their blood and their urine to see inflammation markers. And then we finally fed them the fake beef, the Impossible Burger. So we can overlay all these different dynamics against each other. So yeah, where we're at right now is we've finally collected all this data. This has been about $1 million project so far. We've spent about $1 million. And we've got all this data collected and built, the database built to house it all, which anybody who's done science is a real pain in the butt. To be able to overlay 100 different nutrients against 200 microbes, against 50 management practices, against, right? So it's, I mean, the act of actually looking for patterns here is a really complex logistical hassle.
Yes, data science.
It's a, hiring somebody to build the thing, I mean, it costs money.
Yeah.
Like, getting the samples shipped from around the planet and getting all the permits and everything else, and paying for the 500, compounds per steak sample is one thing, but then building the database to actually populate it all, it's no small feat. Anyway, we're at the point now where we actually have the data in a format, and right now, we're welcoming anyone who's credentialed to be part of what we're calling the Bionutrient Definition Standards Board. So we give microbiologists the microbiome data, and we say, here's the microbiome data from 500 animals. You tell us which animals look like they have the healthiest microbiome and the least healthy. And can you rank the animals in between? We give the biochemists the biochemistry data. Say, here's the biochemistry of the steak from 500 different steaks. You tell us which ones look like they have the most human health beneficial compounds and the least, and can you rank them? We give the agronomists the soil data and the fodder data. We say, you look at this fodder and you tell us which ones you think have the best and worst, quality. We give the nutritionists the human health data. We say, you tell us which inflammation marker responses look like they're most and least appropriate. And then we put that all back on top of itself. And we say, we hope that the animals that the microbiologists said were the healthiest have the compounds in their meat that the biochemists said was most nutritious, that caused the best human health outcomes that the agronomists said were best for the environment. But we don't know yet because this is original research. Right? Original research is you don't know. We have a thesis, but should this proceed forward as we think it might, we have a thesis that nature works in patterns. That's our thesis, that there are patterns of nature that we can use the Western rational empirical framework to assess. Our idea is that we'll find some biomarkers. So the omega-3/6 ratio, perhaps with maybe vitamin B12, perhaps with polyphenols. There may be a few compounds that we find we can say at these levels and ratios equals the 80th percentile of quality, the 40th percentile of quality, the 20th percentile of quality. That's our thesis. At that point, then you can calibrate a meter to test. So I just want to show you here. This is a meter that a friend of mine gave me in France a couple weeks ago. It is, here's the actual thing. It's called Magic Pencil. It's made by a company in China. They were very, very good, engineers. They knew what they're doing. This is way the hell more complicated and sophisticated and capable than the one we built. It costs less than the one we built. He sent leaf samples. Anybody heard of plant sap analysis? Other people heard of plant sap analysis? So he basically took a few hundred plants. So he took this wheat and this wheat and this wheat and this oats and this oats and this oats and this cucumbers and cucumbers and cucumbers. He took the samples of leaves, flashed the light at it with this, and then sent those leaves off to a lab for plant sap analysis. And for I think less than $20,000, was able to build calibrations so that this thing, and with 96% confidence interval, not bad. You stick a leaf in here, flash the light, and you get a reading in real time for plant sap analysis.
The whole leaf
You just,
squeeze the
no, you just, the leaf on the plant. Stick it in here, flash the light. You don't need to send leaves off to labs for plant sap analysis. Real-time readings, right? Whether this one will be able to look at omega-6, omega-3, or whatever the compounds are that we find, we don't know. But the point is, with spectroscopy, with this technology that's been around for decades, with which we can see things that are billions of light years away. How far away is a billion light years? That's a really long distance.
Perhaps it's already there.
We can see, but you ask the astrophysicists and they'll tell you these stars 4 billion light years away are made up of these elements. Right? We are able to do scientific assessments of things that far away based on the light that comes off of them. If that's true, maybe it's possible that we can see what a piece of steak in front of us is made up of. And we can see if this steak is 80 out of 100, or 40 out of 100, or 20 out of 100. So that's where we're at in this process right now. Have been, as part of my tour for the past 2.5 weeks through Europe, talking to a bunch of researchers who are interested or capable and competent in the topic of wheat. Wheat is the next crop we're looking at. And again, it's a crop which is a major staple. It's a big part of humans' diets. Things like zinc deficiency correlates with human stunting for hundreds of millions of people in the world. And
like excess of glyphosate.
Excessive glyphosate. Well, we aren't looking for toxins, but we could look for toxins. What we're focusing on primarily is nutrients. But it's a whole other conversation. But the point is, crop by crop, we did beef for $1 million. Maybe we can do other crops for less than that. Say $20 million, 20 million euros, in a charitable format, used to collectively discern the relative quality of food and then to build calibrations that could be in people's hands, we think could profoundly shift the way that agriculture is practiced globally. And again, if I'd done my whiteboard thing first, you'd understand that the capacity for climate change to be reversed, at least the effects of extremes of heat and things like that, to be reversed through agriculture practiced well, is at our fingertips. Right? It's not just chronic disease. It's the extremes of climate imbalance based on how agriculture has desertified. I think 40% of the Earth's land surface has been desertified to the practice of agriculture in the last 10,000 years. Right? We have had a profoundly negative effect on the ecosystem. And if we can break it, we can fix it. The question is, how do we incentivize the fixing? Right now, we're not incentivized to fix. But if we can cause it to be that people make more money doing the right thing, our thought is, in very short order, we can effectuate some amazingly positive outcomes. So the end game, the final end game here, as I understand the science, there's no reason that the cameras that are currently in your phone couldn't be used to do this job. It's called hyperspectral imaging. If we have a large enough data sets, we can build the patterns, and it could simply be an app on your phone. So no one needs to buy an instrument. It simply is something that anybody can go and do. And if you can go and you can see you got 3 varieties of milk, you get the one that's good, and you post on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok which variety is best. Right? The first mover advantage here for the supply chain to straighten up their quality of their crops, these companies, right? Like any company who wants to move on this topic can make a lot of money, right? If people begin to realize this milk is better for me, I'm not going to have the lactose intolerance, this milk is not, right? We can facilitate, by working with business, profound shifts in short order. So, are people ready to ask questions now?
I had a question based on, I think it was among the last things you were saying that imagine the consumers had this tool available, and then we could just simply choose, let's say, the healthier product over the less healthy one.
Yeah.
But then the question I raised in me that would eventually have like a higher price also, and what do you expect that there'll be people like still going for the less healthier because of economic reasons, the price?
Okay, good. Yeah.
On the same level, accessibility. Imagine a place maybe where people have no access to technology, or you were talking about a potential like how do you make it accessible for people that don't have access to these technologies already?
Okay.
And what is the sort of investment that farmers need to make to change their systems so that the food becomes, more nutrient dense? And how can these farmers be supported in doing this without kind of like consequences?
Yep. Who else? Anybody over here? No? Somebody had a question. I said I wouldn't answer it until. Where is she? No. That's it?
How can nutrient density be a product?
Be a product?
Yes. Or a service, or something that you can fit into a capitalist system, let's say. Yeah, like a business model or something. Like Audacious is doing, for example, they have created a way of working with nutrient density that it's like profitable, let's say.
Okay.
Ecosystem
Think about that.
services.
I haven't thought about that one. I'll work on that one. I don't have a good answer for that one. I was thinking somebody might be curious about how to do it.
Yes.
Nobody seems to be curious about how to do it. Those who were here for the 2-day course, that's theoretically what we're talking about. So after lunch, this is all we're going to be talking about. But do you mind if I start with the basic principles? As yeah? I think there's some insights here that are applicable across the board. I was hoping that someone would ask, but no. All right, so I'd like to start my presentations with a little stick figure. And for those who don't appreciate my artwork, this is a plant. We generally will acknowledge that plants are green. Most of us will say yes, most plants are green. Most of us will say that the cause of that greenness is the chloroplast in the leaf, in which occurs the process called photosynthesis. Everybody generally is okay with that series of statements. We've got the water plus carbon dioxide plus sunlight equals oxygen and sugar. Most people have heard this story. What I certainly learned in high school was that the oxygen is emitted out of the atmosphere, out of the leaves into the atmosphere, and that's what we breathe. What I did not learn was that in nature, specific caveat here is in nature, in healthy plants in nature, the sugar is taken from the leaf down through the stem, through the roots, and injected into the soil. Anybody else heard this story? Heard about this? Yeah? Okay. Who's heard of Darwin? Anybody heard of Darwin? The survival of the fittest thing? I win by you losing? You heard that story? Survival of the fittest, we tell the people story? Yeah? So if nature has developed a strategy amongst all plants to cover their bodies in green, to make things that they then inject out of their bodies into the environment, who's wrong? Nature or Darwin? The pattern of nature seems to be this. Across the board, around the entire planet, plants are green to make things that they then inject out of their bodies. Does anybody want to disagree with me with this? No? Why? Well, specifically I'm going to focus on this part down here. People know why the plants make the sugar and inject it into the soil?
Because they need other beings to work with them, and they are feeding those beings.
Because in none of the first 6 days did God invent fertilizer. Yeah. For the first 420 million years that plants were growing, there was no ammonia, urea, potassium nitrate, liquid fish, blood meal, bone meal, right? For hundreds of millions of years, plants have been feeding themselves just fine without the use of fertilizer. Everybody's okay with the statement? Nothing too revolutionary here? Okay? I mean, Just because we learned something in a university about how to grow plants does not mean that that's how plants have been growing for a long time. So the way plants have been growing, actually, I had the privilege to study with a woman named Lynn Margulis. Anybody who know who Lynn Margulis is? The Gaia thesis. Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock proposed the Gaia hypothesis. At my university, she was teaching evolutionary biology, and I was able to take a semester course with her. Not that that's entirely pertinent to the point I'm making, but I guess it's a point of reference. It seems that the way things worked was that the microbes came first, and they evolved the plants. Right? The microbes evolved the plants to support them in establishing on land. They needed somebody to feed them functionally. They had access to, chlorophyll in the ocean with the, what are they called? The microalgae, yeah, exactly. But they needed a way to be fed on land. And so they functionally evolved plants as a structure to support them in colonizing the land surface of the planet. People know about this?
That's brilliant.
Evolutionary biology? People know about this? Some people know about this? Evolutionary biology. Guess who evolved the animals? The microbes, to manufacture them and distribute them across the ecosystem. What percentage of the cells in your body are animal? 10. 90% of the cells in your body are not animal cells. Who's heard of this concept of kingdoms? Get the plant kingdom over here, and the animal kingdom over here, and the fungal kingdom over here, and the bacterial kingdom over there. You show me an animal that can exist with only animal cells. This kingdom framework is an entirely fraudulent framework. Actually, we are ecosystems. We are either symbiotic or pathogenic, depending on the nature of the microbes, which are the vast majority of the cells in our bodies. We know we can't digest our food. We know it's only the people inside of us that digest our food for us. Yeah? Everybody okay with that? Yeah? Yeah? At birth, what's this magical substance which comes out of a mother's breast before milk? Colostrum. And what's it for? To establish gut flora. Because if you don't have a gut flora established, you can't digest your food. A baby that does not get a well-established gut flora, in English we call them a colicky baby. That's a baby that cries and is sickly and doesn't sleep and is generally doesn't put on weight. A colicky baby. I'm not sure how you say it in Portuguese. That is a baby who didn't get its gut flora established well at birth. It's a crying. Anybody ever heard a baby cry? It's a nature's fire alarm. It's nature's fire alarm. It's telling you there is nothing else more important right now except this to focus on. A baby that cries is a baby that does not have a gut flora well established. You are not a baby. It's not a human. It's an ecosystem. And only when that ecosystem is functioning well does the baby do what babies are supposed to do, which is sleep. A healthy baby nurses and sleeps, occasionally poops, now and then looks up at you and gurgles, nurses and goes back to sleep. Anybody ever been in the presence of one of those babies? Yeah? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Heard about it? Never heard about it. Yeah. There's a big difference between healthy babies and unhealthy babies. Right? Everything is, it's critically important at birth to have the gut flora well established that correlates to the overall system function in profound ways. We cannot live without our microbiome. Plants cannot live without their microbiome. So when I'm teaching courses to farmers about how to make a living farming, the first thing I tell them is, I don't care what kind of plant you think you're growing. To me, it's completely irrelevant. What's relevant to me is the microbiome. It's about the bottom of the food chain. It's about who came first. It's about who eats first. It's about who's in charge. Only when the microbes are happy will the plant function well. It's completely irrelevant whether it's an apple or a carrot or wheat or echinacea. It does not matter whatsoever if the environmental conditions are not fit for the microbes to function. Because if the microbes don't function, the plant won't function. It's really, really simple in my mind. I may have a simple mind, but sometimes that's not a bad thing.
Yes.
What do they say about common sense? Ain't that common. I've got a BA in history, right? That's as far as I got, and I barely got there. Took a while to finish my BA in history. But I did study evolutionary biology and 20th century physics and organic chemistry, and I'm conversant in these things. I understand the basic concepts around them. So when I teach my course, I say there's basically 5 critical environmental conditions that are necessary for the microbiome to function. And your responsibility as a farmer, as a gardener, as a land steward, however you want to define yourself, is to create a dynamic where those aspects are present. And when you create the dynamic where those aspects are present, you can sit back, you can take a nap, you can go play with your kids, because nature will do the job of growing the plants, as she has been doing for hundreds of millions of years. So what are the environmental conditions that are necessary? Air. Microbes need air to breathe. Right? If someone took a bag and put a zip tie around it over the head of a chicken or a cow, it wouldn't take long for that chicken or cow to be dead. If your soil is tight, if you've got subsoil compaction at the depth of 3 centimeters, you shouldn't expect the microbes to exist. I mean, there will be some anaerobes, there will be some level of life, but as far as the level of life which is sufficient for a plant to flourish, if you don't have air present, all bets are off. There's another massive one. Ready? Water. Same with chickens and pigs and cows. If you don't water a chicken for a week, it's going to be a dead chicken. If your soil is dry, you may water your tomato plants right at the base of the stem where the plant hits the ground, but as above, so below. Your tomato plant is 1.5 meters tall. It should have 1.5 meters of root going out. If you have insufficient moisture for the microbes in that range to function, and what's happening is the plant's making sugar to then inject into the soil to feed the microbes, which then digest the soil and feed the plant, which is how it all works. I skipped that little point. Right? This is how nature evolved it to work. The plants make the sugar, they feed the soil life reproduce, they go out, they do their job, they solubilize the nutrients, they exude acids, they exude bases, they raise and lower pH. Right? In nature, pH is not static. In the rhizosphere, pH is not a static thing. What the microbes can do is they can exude acids and bases and raise and lower pH. So if you want to solubilize phosphorus, boom, shift the pH, solubilize phosphorus. Now you want some copper, boom, shift the pH, solubilize the copper. In agronomy, we're taught that pH must be at a certain level for nutrients to be available. That's true in a test tube. In a test tube with water, you put a piece of copper in there. If your pH is not appropriate, that copper will not solubilize. Yeah? Weird plants did not evolve to grow in test tubes. Plants were evolved by microbes to feed them. Microbes have the capacity to exude acids and bases to shift pH. This is the way nature designed the system to function. The concept of soluble nutrients being what plants eat, as a metaphor for animals, would be like, say you were in a car crash, a bad car accident. The emergency services were able to get there in time to take you to the hospital and keep you alive, but you're in a coma, and you're in a coma for a week. How are you fed? IV drip. Soluble nutrients injected directly into your bloodstream. You can be kept alive with soluble nutrients injected directly into your bloodstream. Yeah? Is that how you evolved to eat? No. You did not evolve to eat soluble nutrients injected directly into your bloodstream. You evolved to eat compounds digested through a microbiome. So anybody who thinks that fertilizer is how to grow plants is operating with a completely mechanistic, reductionistic paradigm. It is possible to raise plants on a soluble nutrient drip, but that's not how plants evolve to grow. It's great business for the company selling fertilizer. But in general, you're not going to get that full spectrum of nutrients that that plant needs to be healthy. And then that plant is going to be susceptible to infestations and disease. And then you're going to need to kill those insects and diseases if you want to harvest the crop, which again is great business for the people selling the things that kill the insects and disease. So as far as I'm concerned, a lot of what we call agronomy at this day and age has come from research funded by the companies who have an agenda to sell products to farmers. How was it that indigenous cultures across North America were able to manage the ecosystem from ocean to ocean with profound levels of fecundity? Tens of millions of bison. The birds that flew, when they flew, the sun was gone for hours and days. The rivers were full of fish. They had no plow. They had no beast of burden. They had no fertilizer. And yet, through strategic, sensitive, intelligent engagement with the landscape, they were able to cycle vitality to increase the level of food being produced. Right? Has anybody ever studied what the Aborigines were doing in Australia? I mean, the original historical record, when you read the documents, not just of the white man when they first came to North America, but the white man when they first came to Australia. In both cases, there were these parklands, right? There was amazing amounts of food, massive fields of tubers growing in Australia, right? Does anybody know about this? Anybody read the books? The Dark Emu is a great one. Who talks about this? There's a bunch of books about this. The level of organic matter in the soil in Australia, when the white man first came, was between 10 and 12%. They literally couldn't ride horses because the soil was too spongy. No beasts of burden, no plows, no fertilizer. Actually, no war for 60,000 years. Right? So anybody who says that human nature is aggressive, that human nature is conflictual, that the nature of human society requires aggression and conflict and war, what is the principle of science? When you have one data point which violates a theory, you have to throw the theory out. Do we know about science? These are the principles of science, right? So if we've got a data point which is for 60,000 years on a continent, no war existed, then you can't say that that warring is a nature of humans. Anyway, I digress. Air and water, foundational ingredients, neither of which is it easy to corner the market on and sell to you. I would propose that a lot of the things that we've been taught to use are the things that someone has figured out how to sell to us. I'm a farmer. I'm a farmer first, right? That's how I identify. I identify as a smallholder, subsistence farmer. I may be a white American male, but my childhood was one where there wasn't quite enough ever to really go around. And so I know what it's like to be in that status. And when I lived with subsistence farmers in Siberia when I was 18, and I lived with subsistence farmers in Central America when I was 19, and I lived with subsistence farmers in India when I was 22, I got to see what it's like for people that didn't have quite the level of privilege that I had. And those are the people who I feel responsible for. Those are the people who I'm working to develop strategies for to, address the imbalances that have occurred due to human impact over the centuries on the ecosystem. We've got a model of how humans can very comprehensively and proactively create profound vitality and fecundity, and we've got a model for how humans can desertify land. I use the example of Palmyra, this city in eastern Syria. Well, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a 2,000-year-old city, and for those who were paying attention to the dynamics with ISIS 10 plus years ago, ISIS was coming over and they took over Palmyra, and then the Syrian government was coming over and they kicked them out for a while, and then ISIS came back and kicked them out. Minor point, but all around Palmyra is many, many dozens of miles of desert in all directions. 200 miles in that direction, 100 miles in that direction. A big distance in all directions is a desert. So you might ask the simple question, whose brilliant idea was it to build a city in the middle of the desert? And the answer is, it wasn't the desert. It was a fertile plain. It was a land of milk and honey. And then we practiced agriculture. And we failed. And now it's a desert. 40% of the Earth's land surface has been desertified through the practice of agriculture. It's like practicing medicine. If you practice medicine and all of the people you practice on die of cancer, maybe you aren't a very good medical practitioner. If you practice agriculture and all the land you practice on desertifies, maybe you're not a very good practitioner. Maybe we should look for other models, for other human cultural traditions which have shown us alternate ways of practicing agriculture. There's this term permaculture, which is developed by some Australians in the last century, not too long ago really. I would suggest that what we call hunter-gatherers, those people that we don't particularly have deep respect and understanding of, were practicing permaculture at a level which we can't really properly comprehend. A level of complete ecosystem care and management. Sensitive, thoughtful, wise, comprehensive engagement with nature. And they've modeled levels of fecundity and productivity which are just, are beyond us, right? So there's some basic environmental conditions that if we work to establish them, the Native Americans referred to each animal as having a role. They said chipmunk has a role, squirrel has a role, wolf has a role, human has a role. We're one of the animals in nature. I would suggest we are animals who belong in nature. I would suggest we do not belong in cities. Actually, we belong in nature, and the more we are denatured by living in cities, the more we're likely to die. But that's just another one of my rants. The role of the human animal, according to Native Americans, is caretaker. Caretaker. Our responsibility is to ensure that the ecosystem is managed thoughtfully and comprehensively for the betterment of all beings. You can't do that from a city. I propose you can't do that on a 1,000-acre monoculture farm. I suggest that the smallholder responsible for 1 or 2 hectares is able to manage, with the current structures of property ownership that we have now, right? Because in those times, the concept was that you belong to the land, not that the land belonged to you. I'm not proposing we overthrow land ownership. That's a bit of a stretch. But let's envision a possibility where people actually have the capacity on a small holding to provide for their families in a systemic and comprehensive fashion. The data, as I understand it, through a perennial polyculture model, certainly you can involve some annuals, but the nature of nature seems to be primarily perennial. Like the capacity for us to live in harmony with land to provide for our families in large measure at low cost, at low effort, is absolutely at our fingertips. I was just saying during the break that
1 bill with 8 billion in the planet
100%.
is difficult.
There's 10 billion hectares of agricultural land on the planet currently. 10 billion hectares of agricultural land in the world currently. If 40% of the Earth's land surface has been desertified, if every family has a hectare or 2 hectares, I was making a living for my family on a third of a hectare, right? I was working 20 hours a week, making $50,000 a year on a third of a hectare in a place where the ground is frozen for 4 months of the year. Here, the ground is dry for 4 months of the year. We've all got our issues. We've all got our imbalances. We've all got our climatic, dynamics to address. I've spent time in India. In India, they have this thing called a monsoon, right? The monsoon, you get 30 or 40 inches, a meter or more of rain per year, which for you guys, a meter of rain, come on. What could you do with a meter of rain? What else would you need? Right? They get the meter of rain, but it all runs off. You must have water in your soil for life to function. Anybody heard of beavers?
Yeah.
Beavers? You know what beavers are? Right? They dam the water up, right? So strategically, if we understand that rain happens in a lot of the world that is desertified in certain periods of time, what happens when rain lands on dirt, on tight, hard dirt? It runs off. So we can get, what would it be? 20 millimeters of rain on a tight, hard dirt, and it'll run off, right? So it's not that you don't have the rain. Maybe you don't have enough, but what I heard somebody saying in the back was with all these intensive olive plantations that are going on down south, what people are saying is the weather's changing. The weather's changing, right? Climate, can we talk about climate? I'm just going all over the map right now. Who has been barefoot on dirt in the beating down sun in the summer? Anybody ever? You need to hop yourself off to somewhere else really fast because it scalds the bottom of your feet.
Yeah.
Whoever has been barefoot on grass in the beating down summer? You're not hopping off to somewhere else because you're totally comfortable.
It's fresh.
So why are you able to stand barefoot on grass in 45 degrees C temperatures and not able to stand barefoot on dirt? Transpiration. Because what plants do is they transpire water through their leaves into water vapor. The amount of energy that's required to convert water to water vapor is dramatic. So you're taking the heat from ground level, you're converting it into water vapor, it rises to 2,000 meters, it hits cold air, it converts from water vapor to water, it forms a cloud, which causes albedo, which then causes the sunlight no longer to come down to the ground, and the heat is released above the cloud and goes back into space. What you have is a functioning water cycle. So what do you need to start that process? You need water. You have to have water in the soil for the plants to grow. So when you get rain, what you need to do is stop the rain from running off. And if you can maintain moisture in the soil, then you'll maintain green plants on the ground, then you won't have that extreme heat, then you won't have the heat dome, which causes a high pressure, area, which causes the clouds to move around it. When you get that heat dome, when you have too much bare dirt in the beating down sun, it causes a high pressure area, which causes the clouds to get moved, right? The clouds can no longer come from the ocean, and they get pushed aside. So all you have to do in here in Iberia, in Italy, in, how about the Sahara? Right, it used to be a savanna in the time of the Romans. The Romans cut down the savanna, plowed the ground, grew the grain for their legions to conquer Europe, and now it's desert. Right? We broke it, we can fix it. We entirely have the capacity to engage landscapes, and with nature's gifts, every year, if we engage them strategically, create a dynamic where systemic benefit can occur. Right? It's not at all difficult. Obviously, there's not a lot of selling of products to do here. Maybe some mini excavators, maybe some big excavators. Maybe we can use some machinery to build some dams at anywhere where the land has any kind of an angle, so that when it does rain, it's stopped to make ponds. This is part of the permaculture principle. Right? Permaculture talks about stockpiling water as high in the landscape as possible, and you keep it there. In Rajasthan, they're doing this thing called digging tanks. There's a water wizard, I can't remember what his name is, in Rajasthan. He's inspiring these villages to dig holes. So when the monsoon comes, the water, instead of running off, goes into the hole. They call it a tank in India. And then around the edge of that, trees start growing, which then transpire moisture, which then form clouds, which then make rain. And they're reversing desertification in rural India through the high-tech process of digging holes. Right? The capacity for us to have profoundly positive impact on the ecosystem to ameliorate the effects of climate change. We can talk about carbon all day long. We can monitor and measure and monetize carbon all day long. As I understand it, carbon is plant food. Here's another factoid for you. Plants can't photosynthesize when CO2 is below 180 ppm. If you look at the trajectory of CO2 in the atmosphere over the millions of years, it wasn't 5,000 ppm. We were down to 250. Right? When the mollusks figured out how to make shells, right, the diatoms and the clams figured out how to make shells, they started taking the carbon dioxide out of the water, making shells, and when they died, that fell to the bottom. And we have these massive layers of limestone, which are the thousands of ppm which were carbon in the atmosphere, which are now completely unavailable carbon. Below 180 ppm, plants can't photosynthesize. We were close to the point where life was going to die out because of the process of diatoms in the oceans making shells and slowly sequestering sufficient carbon for plants not to be able to grow. So you could actually argue that nature evolved humans to dig up hydrocarbons to release some carbon into the atmosphere so we wouldn't be on this death spiral for life on the planet. That may be too much of a thought right now. But as I understand it, the lower the CO2 is in the atmosphere, the more a plant needs to keep its stomata open to be able to bring in the CO2 to engage in photosynthesis. When the stomata are open, part of what happens is they lose water. So what's happening now, as CO2 is rising in the atmosphere, is that plants that are living on the edge of deserts need to open their stomata less to bring in sufficient carbon dioxide to photosynthesize, and slowly plants are beginning to grow in to reverse desertification because of the increased CO2 in the atmosphere. In research where people are optimizing plant growth in greenhouses, they take natural gas and they burn the natural gas to bring the CO2 in the greenhouse up to 1200 ppm, because 1200 ppm is an optimal concentration for plants to grow. Anybody know about this research? Yeah. I'm getting a bunch of nodding up here in the front section from people who should know better. Yeah. Anyway, how nature works, I think, is a foundational place for us to be operating from. How nature has worked, how humans have worked with nature. Like, we've got our one context, which is the conventional agronomic science, And I love knowing that molybdenum is a center of a nitrogenase enzyme, and that I only need 1 pound of molybdenum on every acre to facilitate all the nitrogen fixation from the atmosphere necessary for all my plants to fix all the nitrogen, so I don't need to add nitrogen fertilizer. I think that's totally cool. Anybody heard of Krasilnikov? Krasilnikov, the Russian microbiologist? His book is right in here. In the 1970s, he had studied all crop plants on the planet. Every civilization, every culture's crop plants, every single one of their crop plants, every single one of the crop plants that humans had been utilizing had symbiotic relationships with free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They didn't have nodules on their roots like legumes do. So there's some scientists that figured out a long time ago what those nodules were and said, look, legumes can fix nitrogen. We said, amazing, great, legumes can fix nitrogen. Awesome, have legumes in your rotation. But in the 1970s, that's when I was born, that's like 50 years ago now, we had the data published in Russian to show that every single family of crop plants, that would be the broccoli family, that would be the corn family, that would be the cucumber family, that would be the beet family, apples, citrus, wheat, all have evolved symbiotic relationships with free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. The nitrogen-fixing bacteria need this enzyme called a nitrogenase enzyme to pull nitrogen out of the atmosphere and make it bioavailable. Just because they don't have nodules doesn't mean they don't have the capacity to do this. At the center of the nitrogenase enzyme is an element called molybdenum. You cannot have the nitrogenase enzyme, you cannot have this process of nitrogen fixation occurring if you do not have molybdenum in the environment. Molybdenum is an anion. That means it leaches. So if somebody's been doing tillage around here for the last 50, 100, 200, 500, 2,000 years, right? Farming's been happening here for a while. When you till the soil, the organic matter oxidizes. The anions that are held in the organic matter are released. When rain happens, the anions are leached out. So through the process of agriculture, poorly practiced, we have leached out a bunch of the anions, like sulfur, right? Like boron. Boron, critically important element in biological system function. It's an anion. You till, use up the organic matter, it leaches out. Conventional agronomic science, right? Proper scientists have told us about these things. They've told us about enzymes. They told us about biochemistry. They told us about the critical role of these different elements. I think it's amazing that we have access to this wisdom so we can understand what the key elements are that we need for life to function. B12, you've heard about B12? Anybody heard about vitamin B12? Right, cyanocobalamin has cobalt at the center of it. 80% of the species of soil life are B12 dependent. If you don't have sufficient cobalt in your soil, you can do everything else right. But if you don't have B12, 80% of the species of soil life can't exist. Right? There's a critical role for chemistry, for biochemistry, enzyme systems. These are really, really important pieces of information. And now that we know them, we can understand how nature, through her process of remineralization, which may occur over millennia, right? Glaciers only come through every now and then. There's this whole thing with the continental drift and the plates moving up and down and back and around, right? I think it was Snowball Earth was a few 100 million years ago. When's the last time this area was glaciated? When's the last time the parent rock was ground up and a new dose of rock minerals was laid on the land, right? Volcanoes is a great way for minerals to be reapplied to the landscape. Glaciation is a great way. That hasn't happened here in a while. Your soils are denuded in these basic minerals. Why is it that agriculture was able to succeed for thousands of years in river valleys only? Why is it that our agricultural civilizations of historical note, whether it's the Tigris and Euphrates, or the Nile, or the Ganges, or the yellow in the Yangtze. Why is it that these civilizations were able to maintain agriculture in river valleys?
The river was.
Because every year the spring flood would dose the land with a new batch of minerals. The process of tillage is a process of breaking up organic matter through rain, minerals get leached out, pulling off tons and tons of crops, right? The plant thinks of its seed as its baby. Whether it's a tomato or a wheat or an apple, it puts into the part we harvest the most important nutrients it can access from the environment. So if you're hauling off the land 2,000, 20 tons of vegetables, how many tons of squash? How many tons of wheat every year? Do it for 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, and you begin to remove from the environment the critical elements for nature to function. So agriculture is not a natural process, right? The act of harvesting off the land tons of the most complex, most nutritionally optimized compounds from the land, it's not natural. So we understand we're removing minerals from the land, we need to replace minerals to the land. Minerals, one of the pieces of the puzzle. You don't need a lot. You need 1 pound of molybdenum, you need 5 pounds of boron, you need 4 pounds of cobalt, you need 10 pounds of copper per acre. Right? You don't need a lot of these things. But if you don't have them, life doesn't function. I would argue that this is, from my perspective, one of the key things that we need to be considering for the global south, for the developing world. There's only a few things that need to be brought in from off-site. I don't think we need compost. I don't think we need fertilizer. I don't think we need a lot of the things that are the products of business. But I think we do need minerals. How do you source the minerals? Well, nature has created the continents out of rock and the oceans out of seawater, sea salt. There's 92 elements in sea salt. 92. 75 pounds of sea salt per acre. It's a wonderful prophylactic dose of a broad spectrum of minerals for any land, anywhere. I suggest, the rock dust as a byproduct of industry. We've got mines where rock is quarried and crushed and used for roads and all kinds of stuff. There's a waste product called, fines or float or rock dust. It's basically what the glaciers grind up and what comes down the river and gets spread, or used to get spread on the Nile River Valley until they built the high Aswan Dam. Now they built the dam and we don't get the floods which spread the minerals on the land. Right? Air, water, minerals. These minerals in the form of rock and seawater are what the planet is made out of. It's going to be pretty hard for somebody to corner the market on those, right? And charge a premium and maximize profit. That might be part of why you've never heard about it. As far as I'm concerned, a lot of the things we're told and taught come from people who have an incentive in telling us and teaching us them. I guess I'm cynical. I guess I've just been around a little while. But it sure seems to me that the support for the greatest good is not the dominant information that comes at me through the cultural interface, right? The things that in some way or shape or form will support someone in making profit seem to be the things that come at me with greatest quantity through all the structures of culture. I'm sorry. But for farmers, if your objective is to be economically viable, these are the environmental conditions, critical environmental conditions that must be necessary. The next one, food. Microbes need food to eat. Shouldn't be too complicated. When the plants are green and they're making sugar and they're dropping it into the soil, great, all things are great. Where I live, we have this thing called winter, right? Things are starting to turn brown right now. The ground will start freezing pretty soon. The snow will set in, and the snow will stay there for 2 or 3 months. There's no green leaves making sugar, feeding the microbes. They don't hop on a plane and head off to Florida for the winter. right? When I was a kid, we put our meat and our vegetables and our fruit in the freezer. We canned some of the fruit. We put our potatoes and our carrots and our rutabagas and our beets in the root cellar. You know, we had our squash sitting there. We had our onions and our garlic put aside. Because there's not much food out there to harvest in the winter. We put aside food for the winter when things weren't growing, we could pick fresh. Who's putting aside food for their microbes when there's no green leaves? They have to eat something. I suggest they eat organic matter. Right? In nature, plants, dead plant parts fall on the ground. And those dead plant parts are what microbes eat. Plowing the soil and leaving it bare for 2 or 3 months is ensuring starvation for your microbiome. We engage in a number of systemic practices which are categorically destructive. I like to say, if you haven't committed genocide recently, take the tiller out for a quick spin. Right? A few 100 billion organisms will be dead in about 5 minutes. Right? Anybody? I don't know. Genocide? Not a good thing? Right? Don't think I want to be doing it? Well, understand the implications of your actions. If you are responsible for a piece of land and you let it dry out, right? Here's your row of tomatoes. Here's another row of tomatoes. Here's bare soil, dirt. It's wet here. It's wet here. It's dry there. Well, there's a bunch of people who maybe used to be alive when it rained, but now they're dead because you, the caretaker, were not responsible for, their survival. You let them. You created a reality where they're dead. Foundationally, only when the bottom of the food chain is able to flourish will the middle of the food chain flourish, which is the plants, and will the top of the food chain flourish, which is the animals. Right? It's foundational to establish these dynamics. The final piece of the puzzle is life itself, which is the microbiome. We talked about colostrum before. When the baby's born, the colostrum comes out of the breast. That establishes gut flora. When you plant your seeds, what's the spectrum of microbes that those seeds have access to when they germinate? Right? If you have a sterile media, if you're starting seedlings in a tray, in a pot, and the thing you're putting those seeds into is cocoa coir or peat moss, maybe you got some little pellets of salt fertilizer, you're starting your baby off on an IV. That's going to be a colicky baby. That baby's never going to have strong bones and a good immune system. That baby's going to get sick anytime a cold comes through. Right? One of the best ways to establish a dynamic where you need all kinds of things to be applied is when you start your baby off without a healthy gut flora. If there's any one thing to do that's the most potent, most comprehensively beneficial, which has the least cost and takes the least effort, it's to establish healthy gut flora at birth. Right? Inoculation is something a lot of people have heard about. It's completely powerful. In the US, in many states, you can't plant a corn seed if it's not coated in fungicide because they're afraid of fungal pathogens. It's a law. That's like giving your babies antibiotics at birth. That's the complete opposite of giving them colostrum. Right? Because we think that we're so sophisticated in fighting disease, because we don't understand that nature has evolved this function to flourish, and that nature takes out the things that are unfit. We think that we're somehow in charge. We don't understand that nature's in charge. We don't understand that we live at the whim of nature, that only when we are in right relationship with nature do we flourish. We somehow think that we're the masters. Right? It's a completely perverse perspective. It's so hubristic. It's so arrogant. It's the essence of this colonized mentality. right? Yeah. The opportunities for improvement are everywhere, right? The opportunity to do better is everywhere. Just a little bit here, just a little bit there, just a little bit there. And your yields will increase by 50%. You're still at 20% of yield potential, which should be embarrassing, but you were at 12% before, so good on you, right? I mean, people were asking me during the break, like, are we able to feed 8 billion people with your ideas of nutrition? You think that the way we're doing things is somehow anything resembling appropriate? Optimized? I mean, you've had the Kool-Aid, right? We're repeating the storylines of the people who were selling us products. We're not looking to our cultural, traditional, indigenous perspective for wisdom and guidance, right? It's fear. It's this fear story that's propagated. It's this arrogance and cockiness. So anyway, these are the 5 environmental conditions that I think are critical. Obviously we need sunlight. Obviously we need warmth. You know, there's some other basic ingredients. But that's the course in short. And from here on out, it's just a question of how. It's, you know, what are the logistics? What's the timeline? Another one of the key pieces of the puzzle I like to think about is the life cycles of plants. Think about, it's really obvious, in fact, you know, you don't need to study a lot in the university. How is it that these indigenous cultures were able to figure this stuff out without PhDs? Right? Because they had common sense. So birth is germination. Think about transplanting as kindergarten. Think about first flowering as puberty. Think about filling fruit as pregnancy. If you think about a tomato plant that's filling fruit, think about her as a pregnant woman. It's extraordinarily important for a pregnant woman to have all the food she needs at all points in time. If at any point in time that pregnant woman does not have the food she needs, things start to fall apart. Your sacred responsibility is to care for your wife, to care for your mother, to ensure that she has what she needs to be healthy. If you understand that tomato plant that's 4.5 feet tall, that's filling 8 fruit, is a pregnant woman, and you understand that the way she evolved to eat was through symbiotic relationship with a healthy gut flora, and you are reducing water because somebody told you that your tomatoes are somehow better when they are starved of water, understand that those bottom leaves turning yellow and turning brown and falling off is her sacrificing her body for her children, right? In humans, I'm not sure if it used to be said here in Portugal, I've heard it said in other parts of the world, they would say, for every baby, a tooth, right? When women would have 6 and 8 and 10 children, they would lose a tooth every time they had a baby because their body would suck the calcium out of its bones to feed her children. It's called senescence in plants. When you are creating a dynamic where the soil is dry and the microbes aren't able to function, things like potassium are unavailable. Potassium is required to fill a fruit. Where does she have access to potassium to fill a fruit? In her bottom leaves. So what does she do? She sucks it out of them. She sucks the potassium out of her bottom leaves and the magnesium, those electrolytes which can still move. Things like calcium are stable, they're stuck, she can't get those out, but she can at least move the potassium. Every leaf that she sucks the life force out of and turns brown and falls off is nature telling you that she's sacrificing her body for her children. And you call it a disease. You say, I'm going to spray a fungicide. Look how sophisticated I am. Right? When you begin to understand nature's path, nature's model, it's all extraordinarily simple. Where in nature do you see bare soil? Not where she's flourishing. So any practices that you engage which facilitate bare soil are a violation of your mother. Where in nature do you see monocultures? The practices which you engage which facilitate monocultures are a violation of your mother. There's this term weeds. People heard the term weeds? Heard the term weeds? Heard the term cover crops? Like, we understand it's good to have the soil covered. We even understand it's good to have multiple species of plants growing together. We, with our confidence, will buy seeds from somewhere that we've been told are the appropriate things to grow there, when nature is planting the things that she thinks belong there. And with our confidence, we go through and we till them all up. And if we're really sophisticated, we put other plants in. Bioaccumulator plants, ever heard of bioaccumulator plants? Right? In the presence of nettle, boron increases. In the presence of dandelion, calcium increases. Nature's saying, look, you've been abusing me for centuries. But still, I know how to heal myself. Still, I know how to care for myself. I'm planting a nettle here. I'm planting a dock here. I'm planting a dandelion here. Like, that dandelion's not going to compete with your kale plant. That dandelion's not competing with your wheat. Why do you feel the need to go remove it? Understand, she's speaking, she's working, she's addressing these systemic imbalances day in, day out, to the best of her ability. And the more you dry out the land, the more you remove the organic matter, the harder and harder for her it becomes, until you've got desert. But the point is, the power and the vitality are still there. All we need to do is understand the imbalances that are present and begin to address them. If you understand you don't have enough water, well, develop strategies so that next time it rains, the water stays in the land. If you understand there's not enough minerals, get your hands on some of those naturally occurring minerals and bring them back to your land. If you understand there's not enough microbes, go out to nature and harvest some of those microbes from places where she's still growing and put them on your seed. It's so simple. If she's planting weeds, let them be. Right? We can turn this thing around so fast. The power of nature is profound. Someone asked me during the break, how long does it take to rejuvenate land? I can tell you on my farm, it took 2 months. I took tight dirt, light in color, where the plants that were growing there, which now go to seed at 8 feet, we're going to seed at 2 feet. I took that land, I spread a bunch of rock minerals on it, I took the rototiller 5 or 6 passes to get down 3 inches. I made some beds, I put my seedlings in, I put some drip tape down, I put some mulch down, I had inoculated the seedlings ahead of time, or if I was planting seeds, I put some of the inoculant on the seeds. And 2 months later, it was chocolate cake, full of earthworms. From tight, yellow dirt to chocolate cake full of earthworms. 2 months. All you need to do is provide nature the things she needs and get out of her way. Stop messing with her. Right? The opportunities are massive. We can totally do this. Yeah.
Can these principles be applied at scale?
Categorically.
With similar or higher yields than the conventional farming on a monocrop of a commodity crop like wheat or corn on an analysis of 5 years? Can it equal or surpass the yields of conventional agriculture?
Absolutely. The question is, what's our model? Are we just doing a monoculture? Are we understanding that the most optimized yield is a polyculture? Are we willing to shift from one person managing 1,000 hectares to 100 families, each managing 10 hectares? I mean, how far are we willing to think into the future of possibility?
In terms of commodity crops, for example, do you have an example that you follow of a big farmer in the US? Maybe that
there's a group called No Till in the Plains. There's a group called No Till in the Plains, which is based in Kansas, which has been having conferences for 30 years. What's that?
It's a no-till kind of direct seeding.
No Till in the Plains is a grassroots organization that's.
How many hectares they have in general?
Each of these farmers is hundreds or thousands. Hectares, acres, yeah, hundreds or thousands.
Thousands of acres.
Yeah, and they're going down to zero fertilizer. They're integrating cover crops. Their, economics are really, really good.
And still producing commodity?
Yeah,
crops? Yeah.
we're producing commodity crops, and frustrated because they're only being offered commodity pricing.
And can they accommodate some of the phytochemicals? Like, for example, can they accommodate the use of herbicides like glyphosate into the rotations and still do it?
So as I was discussing yesterday, what's her name? Australia.
Yeah.
Consultant.
The of yesterday.
What's that?
The book of yesterday.
Who was it?
The Nicole Master.
Nicole Masters.
Yeah,
So Nicole Masters was telling me this story. If some people may know what Nicole Masters is, she's an agronomist, does a lot of work in the U.S. She works in Montana, lives in Montana now. And she was giving me this example of the regenerative farmer and the organic farmer. And she was talking about how the regenerative farmer was, had planted a polyculture cover crop in the winter, and had in the spring killed that cover crop with glyphosate, did a burn down glyphosate at a pint to the acre or whatever it was, Roundup. And the organic farmer did not, right? I'm not sure if they did cover crops or not, but whether they did cover crops or not, they had to plow the soil to prepare it for planting. Let's say they did cover crops. The regenerative farmer did the burn down of glyphosate and then did a no-till drill, so seeded their wheat into that cover crop residue. When those two farmers harvested their wheat, the organic farmer failed for glyphosate residue. The EU wouldn't allow the import, and the regenerative farmer passed.
Which applied glyphosate.
Which applied glyphosate. Because there's so much glyphosate applied in the U.S. that it, basically goes up with the water vapor and comes down with the rain, and you get rained on with glyphosate whether you want it or not in the U.S. So what happened was, because there was wonderful root structure in the soil, because there was wonderful cover on the soil in the regenerative farm, that supported a level of microbiome that was able to digest the glyphosate that got applied, as well as the glyphosate that came down in the rain. The organic farmer, which plowed the soil to plant and then cultivated 3 times to keep the weeds down, had so weak of a microbiome that the glyphosate that came down in the rain, it couldn't digest. So categorically, we have the capacity to use the scale, machinery, monocultures, chemistry, all these things in balance, right? It's not good or bad, right or wrong. It's about what facilitates life to the greatest degree. So, yeah, I would say the end game, in my vision, is that humans are not wage slaves, whose life force is being sucked living in the city. That humans are back in nature where they belong, in community and culture, with music and dance and food and ceremony. I would say that it doesn't take much, actually, to have a good life. If you've got a simple life, if you've got land tenure, if you've got the autonomy. Right? Jefferson was one of our presidents early on. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. Everybody knows in American history. He proposed this thing called the Jeffersonian ethic, is the concept that a functioning democracy requires independent, self-sufficient landowners. In fact, that's why the vote was restricted to landowners originally in the history of the United States, because they thought that only the people who had land and could pass it on to their children were able to think long-term enough to make holistic decisions. The only way a democracy could function and be healthy is if people had that independence and self-sufficiency on their land and didn't need a job and didn't need to be wage slaves, as Marx would call it, right? So, yeah, there's a whole conversation here about culture and the vision for the future and what the opportunities are, et cetera. But if we want to just take where we are right now, and we want to keep land structures as they are right now, and the scale and the machinery, right? You still want to grow wheat, you still have your 100 hectares, you're still selling to a commodity system. Take your budget of fertility per acre. If you're spending you know, 100 euros per hectare as your fertility, just shift that 100 euros from these materials to these materials. That's how I see it. Just begin to stop doing the things slowly, experiment. Don't do it all at once. Take 10 hectares and experiment. Learn, share, right? We all need to learn these skills. We've all basically lost these practical knowings about how to work with nature, right? Every bioregion is unique. So let's work together to experiment and to begin to, you know, discern what works and what doesn't work. And transition. Don't spend more money, right? Just use the same budget you've got, just use it on different things. And share. And there's so much knowledge out there. There's so many organizations. There's so many information on YouTube. You know, there's so much knowledge, books and consultants and recordings and conference proceedings of people in similar bioregions producing similar crops, starting from similar baselines with similar, you know, subsoil, you know, chemistry, right? These people in this climate zone with this subsoil dynamic. Same climate zone, different subsoil, right? We drove on Tuesday or Wednesday through 3 different subsoils. Here with tons of lime, and then it was to granite, and then it was, I don't remember what the next one was. But like, it wasn't very long. It was 50 kilometers, and we're off, and this is all granite over here, right? So what's going to be applicable in the granite subsoil area is going to be entirely different than what's applicable in the calciferous subsoil area. And those nuances of what's there to work with and what are your underlying imbalances, those all need to be relearned, remembered by us. That's the opportunity. But it's going to take steps. It's going to take a learning process. Don't jump and do it all at once, but begin the experimentation. Yeah?
Are there any agronomical science institutes that you know that are leading the way into research with this?
There's all kinds of pieces all over the place.
Agronomical science.
But with which kind of crops?
With this system of.
I would say this is life is a multi-factor system. So depending on which aspect you're looking at, we have hundreds of papers published, right? The data, the science is all there for all these things. But it's just a question of, you know, is there one university which has the be-all and end-all of the most comprehensive, holistic? I don't think so.
So it's all scientifically idoneous.
Scientifically what?
Scientifically proven.
Are you just throwing me softballs? What's going on over here? You're just teasing out? My understanding is yes. My understanding is yes. That we've tracked down the biochemistry, we've tracked down the microbiology, we've tracked all these. The literature is there if you want to look for it.
Right.
I mean, absolutely, categorically. And I'm happy to share with people to the best of my ability. I don't think that this kind of question and answer format is the most appropriate one. You obviously know a hell of a lot. There's other people in the room who know a lot, right? There are organizations in Europe that have access to this information. It's not a lack of knowledge. It's a lack of intention and attention to this frame. For me, the place you just have to start is it's a biological system. If you don't start with the understanding that plants have been growing for hundreds of millions of years without fertilizer, if you don't start with that foundation and say, I want to get back to that place, then you're never going to end up at that place. The question is, where are we going? What's the end game? I would say the end game is fecundity, profound, just ridiculous vitality in the ecosystem. That's the end game, and we want to be obviating the need for all these synthetics to the best degree possible. But if we need to use them, so be it. Yeah.
So you think the way is not scaling up but scaling out, because you said, like, I'm wondering for myself, my personal life, like if large scale farming can be done by focusing on soil health, but you were just describing like the common small hoarders collaborating for a bigger piece of land. So how do you see it? Like, how do you see the future system?
It's not my business. I can tell you on my land, for me, the priority was, I'm home, my wife is home, we are with our children, and we are sharing the process of child rearing with other families, and we're attempting to have culture and community, and we don't have screens, and the kids don't know what an advertisement is because they've never been exposed to one. That they grow up in land and they walk around and run around barefoot, and they don't know that they have the ability to swing a hammer and build a chicken tractor, and that's just their natural way of being. Right? For me, the whole thing, what got me to start doing this was becoming a father. And for me, that's a sacred responsibility, becoming a father. And your job, your responsibility is to the best possible thing you can for your children, to protect for them and provide for them and support them in their development so that when they do get out into the world, they're as empowered as possible. And so for me, my entire life was organized around that one thing. And it wasn't so much about scale or anything else, it was about how do I create a lifestyle where my children are most well supported to the best of the ability that I knew, which I thought had to do with being in the presence of nature as much as possible and culture, and separate from the system, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Follow up if I can, question.
Yeah, please.
But then how do you sensitize other communities to have this approach? If like
It's not my responsibility. I go where invited, and I speak to people who want to listen to me. But other people's business is not my business, right? We're all responsible for ourselves. We all follow our own path. I think we're all guided by some higher force. I don't care what you call it. To my mind, there is something much more profound out there, and we are all, I say we're all matriculated in the school of life. Whether you agree to it or not, the school of life is teaching you every day. And you can fail your classes or you can pass your classes. But that's what's going on every day, and we're all being guided and shown by some deeper, more coherent, more profound level of being. And so it's not about me teaching anyone, it's about you being open to being guided. And it comes through you. It comes directly through you. It doesn't come through a church, it doesn't come through a person. I mean, it can come through a person, but it, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. I feel like I'm giving a sermon up here.
Some people like.
What's that?
Some people like.
Yeah, well, no one's leaving. I'm not sure what time it is. How much time do you have before lunch?
What do you want?
15 minutes, okay. Yeah, so I've covered a bunch of bases here. There's 15 minutes left, after which I think a number of you will be leaving, and a number of you will be staying for the next day and a half. So perhaps those of you who are planning to stay for the next day and a half can stop asking questions. And those of you who are leaving in 15 minutes or after lunch can have an opportunity to engage if you'd like. Or not if you don't. But let's just give you a chance. These guys over here I think are staying for the next day and a half, and so they're like, okay, let's go. There's two things happening simultaneously here. It's a bit difficult to manage two courses simultaneously, but want to respect those who, yeah. No? If not, that's okay, no pressure. Okay. You can go back to the side of the room. Silence. I've got a handout. I've got a curriculum that I was going to be teaching for the next 12 hours, so I can just open my curriculum and start teaching it. But I feel like we're with 15 minutes left. Yeah, that's not the right thing to do.
I'm confused.
You're confused.
I have many questions. That's why I don't start asking them. What's your purpose of being a farmer?
What's my purpose?
Yeah.
The purpose of being a farmer.
No, your purpose of being a farmer. You are a farmer. You identify as a farmer.
I do.
So what's your purpose?
My purpose is raising consciousness. I consider this to be a covert spiritual op. I spent some time up in the Himalayas when I was quite young, and was exposed to experiences of some profundity, and I feel like I know through personal experience of higher levels of being.
Okay.
And so my purpose, my objective, the reason I'm doing all this work with nutrient density is to support the foundation for that level of experience for humanity broadly.
Okay, I understand that. But as a farmer, you produce for you, for your family, for your community.
Not anymore.
Okay.
No, right now, I mean, it's a long story, but I stopped being a farmer professionally in 2017
Okay.
when I began this work.
Okay.
But I think the point that I just started on is perhaps a point to end on, which is this deeper agenda that is actually what I'm trying to accomplish, if people are willing for me to go there.
So here we have a company.
Who?
This is a company. Vivid Farms and Vivid Foods.
He's
it's a
operating
company.
within the structure of a company.
Yes, they have social responsibility, environmental responsibility, and they are making an example, but they want to share it and to engage others to
Yeah.
do like them.
Yes.
So it's just not enough to lecture. We need more.
Mhm.
As she was asking, how can we enlarge this way of thinking or way of living or way of doing farming
Yeah.
to the rest of the
world.
farmers?
Yeah. Well, I think.
Because everything you say is true.
Well, thank you. I'll take that. that was a black and white statement.
It's not enough. It's short, too short to make a difference for the world, for the change in the climate, for it's.
So this is why the strategy with the meter, right? The strategy is that most farmers are among other things making a living growing food, and in most cases farmers struggle to make a living. And so if we can create a reality where they struggle less, where they're able to make a better living, and we can provide the two options, this is struggling and this is flourishing, and we can support them in flourishing, the idea is that farmers will begin to choose this option as opposed to this option. And right now, a lot of what they're taught and a lot of what they're sold is facilitating their struggle. And this option is theoretically, at least based on my experience for the last 15, 20 years, working with farmers all over the world, correlates to a lot more flourishing. And so the question is how to bring that to scale. How do we support farmers globally in making these changes? And the idea is by having them be able to be economically supported. Like they get more money by doing this and less money from doing that. Because whether it's for the greatest good, whether it's for the soil health, whether it's for the health of their children, whether it's for the health of the environment, this is the way that they make a better living, and this is the way they make a less good living. So the thought is, with the spectrometer, with people who buy food, being able to...
Passing the responsibility to the consumer.
Well, I think that your money is power.
The one that is going to motivate all the chain now.
I think
One by one.
I think money is power. I think right now money is energy. And we talk about voting, right? There's this whole thing that's happening in the US in a couple of weeks called an election. It's a completely rigged situation. Don't pay any attention to it, right? I mean, I'm sorry, I worked in presidential political politics in the US 20 years ago. I was on the inside of a presidential campaign. I saw how rigged it is. I did not put even the littlest bit of care into the politics. What drives the world is money. You spend money every day on food. All of you. Money is spent by you, whether it's you do it or you have a spouse who does it or somebody else, money is spent on food. So if the money that's spent on you for food goes towards food that's more nutritious and does not go towards food that's less nutritious, then all of a sudden we have more money flowing towards nutritious food and money flowing away from less nutritious food. The act of shifting that flow of energy is an act of directing energy towards the solutions. And so from my perspective, it's not anywhere near as bad here in Europe as it is in the US with chronic disease, with children dying, cancer, irritable bowel, all this stuff. At 5 years old, at 8 years old, at 15 years old, at 20 years old. People unable to get pregnant, right? Serious psychological, emotional difficulties. I've got kids that are in elementary school. Like almost all the children in the school are on pharmaceuticals. They're diagnosed with diseases. The levels of the ability to reproduce are crashing, right? At some point, people don't want to die. At some point, people want to be able to have kids. And so if there's no other way to not die or to be able to have kids, but to stop eating junk and start eating food, our thought is people will begin to do that. Now, whether that happens in 2 years or 5 years or 20 years, I have no idea. It's not mine to, I have no control over the matter. All I can do is work to create a dynamic where when people want to choose, they have that choice. And that choice is not created by some bureaucracy, which is perverted, as happened to the organic system in my experience, but is based on true, honest empiricism. And so if we can create a dynamic where people have that capacity to make those choices for themselves if and when they choose, or if they want to organize so that all the lunches at their schools are made from food of a certain caliber, or if they're at the food banks for the people who don't have any money, or for the people that are on welfare, that all the governmental money that's going to support people who don't have money. If all that food is, the government is only provides food of that caliber for those people, right? If we begin to prioritize nutritional value of food personally and culturally, that will drive the transition of the farmers. If the universities were able to support the farmers in shifting their practices to accomplish this, right? I mean, I don't know how it works here in Europe, but the way it works in the US is the money for the research comes from the chemical companies. There's no money for the researchers to focus on soil health, right? The geneticists are like, we could easily breed for nutrition. We want to breed for nutrition, but we simply can't get paid to breed for nutrition. And I'm a seed breeder, but I have a wife, I have children. So for me, I need to pay my mortgage and I need to put food on the table. And if the only job that I can get as a geneticist is to breed for seed that does these other things, I'm going to do it because I lost my tenure on land. I need money to live because I'm a wage slave, because I've been denatured, right? I mean, we're in this really perverse rat race. So to my mind, money drives things, and we got to figure out a way to use money to facilitate empowerment. And that's the strategy, is to create a dynamic where people can be use their enlightened self-interest to do the thing that's best for them that will drive the systemic solution. And once that's in place, we have the people have the opportunity to choose. There's no pressure, there's no obligation, there's no you have to do this or have to do that. There's just an opportunity. But the more we physiologically degrade, the more the inspiration is going to be there. Right? People heard about epigenetics? Epigenetics, the health of the grandmother affects the health of the mother, affects the health of the daughter. Right? We are 3 or 4 generations into building our bodies from insufficient substance. We are degenerating, right? If you can degenerate, you can regenerate, right? If you eat bad food and you fall apart, you can eat good food and heal. So those of us who don't want to die, who want our children to be healthy, who want to have grandchildren, who have some capacity to make choices about how we spend what little money we have, if we begin to do that, and we begin to share with our friends and our neighbors and our family these concepts and empower them to do so, and if the carrots that are nutritious taste good, the kids will want to eat them, right? The carrots that are not nutritious don't taste good, and the kids won't want to eat them. You can force it, you can try to make kids eat their vegetables, but they're animals. They're animals with sophisticated nutrient monitoring systems. If the vegetables don't taste good, they won't eat them. If the vegetables do taste good, they'll fight over them. That's been my experience, right? When you provide the option, then people will choose what's best for them. But right now, there's no option.
I can give you an example. Here
Sure.
in our city, we have an organic market.
Yeah.
For a year now.
Yeah.
it's all the same people that go there to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have new people to go.
Yeah.
And there is an opportunity.
Yeah.
And if they go there for only one time, and they buy it, they taste it, they can go there again. But what we see, you have the same consumers after a year of running the market, organic market, we have the same consumers.
Yep. I'm going to do what I can do.
Me too.
There's 8 billion people on the planet. If each of us 8 billion people finds our purpose and calling and just devotes our life to it, the places we in our maturity, in our adulthood, in our, this is our time of power, right? We have 10, 20 years at this age where we do what we can do. And so we do what we can do, each of us. I'm doing what I can do, you're doing what you can do, each of us do what we can do. There's 8 billion people on this planet, right? It's incumbent on each of us to do what we can do. Yeah, you can get frustrated and you can get burned out, but getting rid of the market is probably not a solution. I don't know.
Not yet.
Yeah, I'm just telling you what I'm doing. Yeah. Yeah.
Are there some foundational books, literature on agronomy science, plant pathology, plant physiology that you think they should be included in the curriculum and they are not?
You are definitely throwing softballs back there.
Because we have influential people that...
There's an amazing library right here. This is one of the best libraries I'm around for a very long distance. Right there. Right there. Anybody who wants to lose themselves in brilliant literature, this man has created an amazing library.
Why are these books not included in the curriculum of universities?
Because the university is not aware of them.
What do people study during 5 years or 4 years?
This is how it happens. It happens person by person, meeting by meeting. The grassroots, bottom up. This is how the world has changed. It's by a small group of committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. If the people lead, the leaders will follow. Right? We all stand up and we do our thing.
I think it's great when consumers can choose, but at the moment I don't see we have enough agronomists that are able to...
So train some.
We don't have...
That's your calling. Train agronomists. You see a problem, that's your thing that you need to change. I saw a problem, we each are shown our own, we each are shown a problem that you can either rant about it or you can choose that to be your calling. But choose a calling and own it and devote your life to it. That's what we all have to do.
We don't have extension agronomy service.
Don't talk about the problems, create the solutions. Create the solutions. Find your calling and own it, 100%. All right. Is it 1 o'clock yet? I don't think I said anything inappropriate yet, but I'm careful, I might start, so better get me off stage before it's too late. Right on time? All right. I hope you've all had a wonderful morning. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thank you very much.